close your eyes for a moment, or don't, especially if you're holding your phone dangerously close to your face. Either way, let's drift back, way back, into a world that's quiet, peaceful, and honestly kind of unaware that life is about to get complicated. We're in Qing Dynasty China, sometime in the early 1800s. And right now, things look calm, too calm. But let's enjoy the calmness first, because trust me, the storm coming later is anything but gentle. Picture this. A soft morning fog sits over long green rice fields. Farmers walk slowly between rows, water shimmering around their feet. Somewhere nearby, a bamboo grove sways lightly in the breeze. Birds are singing. Tea is steaming. And the empire, well, it looks strong, steady, and incredibly proud of itself. China at this time calls itself Zhonghua, the Middle Kingdom, because they genuinely believe the world revolves around them. And honestly, with their culture, art, silk, tea, and giant palaces, can we really blame them? The Qing Empire is massive. Not like your cousin who says he's tall, but is just wearing big shoes. No massive as in mountains, deserts, forests, rivers, millions of people, and a capital city that has palaces bigger than some small European countries. Life here moves slowly, almost sleepily, like the empire has all the time in the world. That let's float into Beijing, where the Forbidden City stands right in the center, like a gigantic red and gold treasure box. It has walls high enough to keep out both enemies and anyone whose social skills aren't good enough for palace life. Inside these walls, everything is calm. Courtyard stones warmed by the sun, gold roofs shining, eunuchs walking quietly, officials carrying documents they probably don't want to read. The emperor himself sits somewhere deep within, drinking tea and trusting that his empire is safe, stable, and not going anywhere. There's a certain peaceful confidence floating in the air, the kind where people believe, we're fine. Nothing can bother us. We are literally the center of the world. And honestly, they had reasons to feel that way. China was rich, powerful, and full of culture. Europe, meanwhile, still thought noodles were exotic. Life of ordinary people. Let's glide away from the palace for a moment and visit the countryside. Imagine long rivers lined with wooden boats, fishermen pulling in nets slowly, chatting about the weather, which, by the way, is always a very safe topic when you want to avoid drama. On dusty village roads, you'd see markets filled with laughter, food stalls steaming with dumplings, and people selling handmade tools, woven baskets, little pottery, bowls, the kind your mom would buy just because they're cute. Families lived simple lives, waking with the sun, sleeping early, and sometimes telling stories under lantern light. If someone had tea, everyone had tea. Life wasn't perfect, but it was predictable, calm, familiar. And this calmness is important because nobody, absolutely nobody, has a clue that the empire is about to face something that will change everything. A peaceful empire. And a problem it didn't suit. When you're chilling in your room, everything seems fine, and then suddenly you smell smoke and realize you left something on the stove? Well, Qing China is kind of like that right now. Everything looks perfect on the surface. But underneath, very quietly, there are cracks. Not dramatic cracks, more like the kind of small cracks you ignore until they suddenly become big enough to make you go, oh. Corruption is slowly spreading, like that one relative who always shows up uninvited. Officials take bribes. Some soldiers pretend to train, but secretly nap under trees. Taxes disappear into someone's pocket on the way to the capital. But because the empire is huge and old, everyone shrugs and says, it's fine, we'll manage. And so, the peaceful illusion continues. A sleeping giant. Let's zoom out a little. From above, China looks like a giant, powerful, ancient, calm. But this giant is also sleepy. Imagine it lying there, eyes half open, comfortable in its old traditions, and refusing to believe anything outside its borders could ever challenge it. Foreigners? Trade? New ideas? No thank you. The empire says politely but firmly. China traded a little with outsiders, mostly tea and silk, but never really took foreign nations seriously. The Qing court kept itself wrapped in its own world. Old books, old systems, old ways. And to be fair, those old ways had worked for centuries, but the world outside China was changing. Fast, steam engines, industrial ships, factories. Europe was leveling up while China snoozed peacefully under its silk blankets. Yet here in Chapter 1, We won't wake the giant just yet, we're still enjoying the quiet. The calm before the storm. In coastal cities like Guangzhou, ships arrive slowly at dawn, carrying spices, cloth, and foreigners with big hats, and even bigger curiosity. Chinese merchants trade tea and porcelain. Deals are made politely, without much excitement. Nobody knows that these ships, these traders, and these foreign goods are actually carrying the seeds of a future disaster. A disaster wrapped not in fire or armies at first, but in tiny brown blocks of something called opium. But that is for later. Right now, the empire is still peaceful, still sleeping, still unaware of the shadow approaching. A world drifting in stillness. Let's return for a final moment to the quiet fields. The sun is setting. A warm orange glow spreads across villages and city walls. Lanterns flicker one by one. Somewhere, a flute plays, soft and slow, blending with the sound of water flowing in a canal. That if you listen closely, you can hear the heartbeat of a giant empire, strong, steady, confident. But history has a habit of surprising even the biggest giants, and though no one knows it yet, the calm days are numbered. This is the last peaceful chapter before the storm begins. China in Chapter 1 felt peaceful, relaxed, and slightly sleepy. Then Chapter 2 is where we realize something important. The Qing Empire wasn't just calm. It was confident. Very confident. We are the best, everyone else is confused, confident. And honestly, when you look at their world back then, you kind of understand why.so. Let's drift gently into this chapter. Soft narration, slow visuals, and a giant empire stretching from deserts to snowy mountains. A nation that believed it was the center. The Qing Dynasty didn't call itself the Middle Kingdom just for fun. They believed China sat at the center of civilization, while other nations circled around it like moons circling a planet. America, Europe, small places far away. Interesting, but not important. The empire felt ancient, wise, and superior. The kind of confidence you usually see in a cat walking across a kitchen counter like it owns the whole house. For the Qing rulers, everything outside China was described with one polite but slightly shady word: barbarians. Not like wild animals barbarians, more like, oh, they're cute, but they don't understand real culture. That was the attitude. The emperor on the dragon throne. Let's glide softly into the forbidden city again. Deep inside, the emperor sits on the dragon throne, wearing robes covered in golden symbols. People bow so much their backs probably hurt. The emperor doesn't walk, he glides. Palace workers whisper. Eunuchs shuffle around like ghosts with paperwork. It's all very elegant and very strict. To rule China was to rule a civilization thousands of years old. Poetry, art, philosophy, calligraphy, medicine, everything. The emperor carried all of that weight on his shoulders. But the Qing emperors also carried something else. A huge amount of confidence that the world would stay the same forever. In their eyes, nothing outside China mattered. Foreign inventions? Cute foreign ideas? Not needed foreign goods? Maybe some clocks and fancy glassware. But that's about it. The Qing court believed their systems were perfect, their culture unmatched, and their traditions unshakable. In short, why change anything when everything seems fine? A society built on order. China loved order. Everything had its place, from people to ideas to teacups. There was a strict hierarchy. The emperor on top, nobles and scholars, farmers, artisans, merchants, and anyone outside China. Well, they weren't even on the list. Life was organized, predictable, and full of rituals. If dinner was at 6, it was at 6. If you bowed to your elders 3 times, you bowed 3 times. No surprises. People lived by Confucian values: respect, harmony, discipline, family, the kind of rules your grandma would love. And this order gave the empire a feeling of stability. A comforting stillness, but also a dangerous blindness. Closed doors to the outside world. One thing about the Qing Empire was very clear. They were not big fans of foreign influence. Trade was allowed, but barely. Foreigners could only enter from one port, Guangzhou. And even then they had to follow dozens of rules. No free roaming. No exploring. No asking too many questions. No wandering into the city because you just want to look around, like tourists do. China believed it didn't need the world. And so the world became a distant annoyance, like notifications on your phone you don't plan to check. This policy of limited trade wasn't just a rule. It was a mindset. Keep China pure. Keep China safe. Keep China unchanged. Spoiler. This mindset would later become one of the reasons the empire nearly fell apart. But we're not there yet. The wealth that looked endless from silk to porcelain to tea. China produced goods the world loved. Silk, soft, shiny, and very expensive in Europe. Porcelain, so perfect people called it China after the country itself. Tea, the drink that England would eventually become addicted to. This trade made China extremely wealthy. Gold and silver flowed in. Ports were busy. Markets bloomed. Life felt prosperous. And when a nation has money flowing in with no effort, confidence grows. Then it inflates. Then it becomes, let's say, a bit too big. And the Qing Empire definitely reached the too big stage. They thought the silver would keep flowing forever. They thought the world needed them more than they needed the world. If only they knew what Britain was planning to sell them later. But again, we're still in the peaceful era. Let's not stress the empire out yet. The court's beautiful illusion inside the palace. Scholars read ancient books and wrote poetry with calm brush strokes. They believed wisdom lived in old texts, not in new ideas. Oh, they didn't care much about foreign science or technology. Steamships? Too loud. Factories? Too smoky. Artillery? Not elegant. Europe was changing fast, industrializing, modernizing, creating machines, while China was still using methods from centuries before. Beautiful methods, but old ones. And because nothing had truly shaken the empire yet, everyone believed everything was fine. The court lived inside a bubble. A golden bubble, beautiful but disconnected from the outside world. The calm confidence before the fall imagined China as a giant river, wide, smooth, flowing quietly with no sign of danger, but underneath the surface, small currents are forming, tiny movements that will soon become waves. But here, in this chapter, the Qing dynasty is still floating peacefully. IT has wealth, culture, power, a giant landmass, a confident emperor, millions of loyal citizens, and absolutely zero idea that trouble is quietly walking toward it from the sea, and the confidence is so strong that even when foreign ships appear on the horizon, the empire still thinks they won't matter. But those ships are carrying something far more dangerous than weapons. They're carrying a product that will slip into China like smoke and leave behind a destruction no one could imagine. That product is opium. But we won't rush into that just yet. Let's stay here a moment longer. In the warmth of a confident empire, unaware that history is about to take a sharp turn, the Middle Kingdom stands tall, proud, and unshaken. But the cracks quietly continue to grow. And soon, very soon, the storm will begin. Let's drift into Chapter 3, a chapter where the camera pans slowly across the ocean, waves rolling calmly, seabirds gliding, and far, far away, ships from the Western world quietly point their noses toward China. No drama, yet, no explosions. Just wooden ships, salty air, and sailors who probably haven't showered in weeks. But we won't talk about that. This is the moment when the world outside China starts leaning in, curious and hungry for a piece of the Middle Kingdom. Europe gets obsessed. The Western world had been hearing stories about China for generations. Tales of silk that felt like liquid, porcelain so fine it looked like eggshells, and tea. Oh, the tea. Europe loved Chinese tea so much that entire families basically ran on it. Not. No life. Not. No British personalities. Oh, while China was relaxing under its peaceful skies, Europe was getting increasingly interested in trading more and more with this ancient empire. The problem? China didn't care. China was like that one friend who says, "I'm not looking for new friends right now." But Europe was persistent. Ships on the horizon. Let's imagine we are standing on the coast of southern China. The sun is warm. The air is humid. Merchants are bargaining. Boats are bobbing on gentle water. And then, far away, little dots appear on the horizon. At first, no one pays attention. Ships come and go, but these ships look different. They are bigger, heavier, and shaped like floating fortresses. And when they get closer, you can hear the foreign voices, see the strange clothes, and smell that European haven't bathed in 3 months scent. These are British and other European traders, arriving with wide eyes and even wider expectations. They want Chinese goods. Lots of them. Europe has a trade problem now. Here's where things get funny in a slow, historical way. Europe wants silk? China has it. Europe wants porcelain? China has it. Europe wants tea? China has mountains of it. China wants, nothing. Nothing Europe has seems interesting to China. European wool, too itchy. European clocks, cute, but not worth a lot. European silverware, China already has nicer stuff. And so the European traders were stuck in a huge problem. They're buying tons of Chinese goods, but China doesn't want anything in return except silvered. Silver flows out of Europe like water leaking from a broken bucket. And Europeans are not happy about this. Specifically, the British are really not happy because their national tea addiction is becoming too expensive. Guangzhou, the one door open to keep foreigners under control, China only allowed trade in one place. Guangzhou.it was like the empire saying, you can come in, but only through this tiny doorway. And no touching anything. Foreigners couldn't explore the city. They couldn't talk to most locals. They had to work through a small group of Chinese merchants. And if they broke any rule, even by accident, the consequences were serious. Europeans complained a lot, but China didn't care. They believed this was how things had always worked and how things would always work. Meanwhile, British merchants are sweating under their wigs, whispering things like, there has to be a better way. Spoiler, they will find a better way, but it will not be better for China. Europe watches and learns as the ships sit in port and traders do their business. Europe gathers information, quietly, patiently. They notice, China has a huge population, huge markets, huge demand for tea, huge pride, and a very, very closed trade system. The British begin thinking like businessmen or pirates. Depending on how you look at it, they ask, what does China want? What can we sell them? What will they buy in large amounts? It's a puzzle that will eventually be answered with a substance that looks harmless, but will break the empire from the inside. But for now, Europe is still brainstorming. A growing curiosity. Western scholars and travelers write excited notes about China. They talk about giant cities, elegant palaces, beautiful gardens. Strange to them, customs, delicious food, and a government system totally different from anything in Europe. They admire Chinese inventions, gunpowder, paper, compasses, porcelain. They admire the peace and order. Compared to Europe's wars and revolutions, China looks peaceful and stable. Too stable. Actually, China feels frozen in time, like a painting, beautiful but unchanging. And the Western world, with its fast-growing industries and hungry banks, looks at that frozen picture and sees opportunity, the perfect market. That isn't open. European merchants talk among themselves in dimly lit ship cabins. If only China wanted something from us, we could make so much money. This empire is huge. Imagine the profits. But China is stubborn and proud and uninterested. And so the European traders return home frustrated, carrying less silver every year. British officials back in London begin to grow impatient. They send letters, plans, suggestions, but everything returns to the same conclusion. We need something China will. But, and slowly, very slowly, a dark idea forms that a soft ocean, a storm coming back in China. The coastline remains calm. Waves wash onto the sand. Boats glide in the evening light. Farmers finish their work as the sun sinks behind the hills. No one knows that across the ocean, men in suits are sitting around tables, planning something that will change the fate of millions. No one knows that the British East India Company, a giant trading corporation, is searching for a product China cannot resist. No one knows that this product already exists, that it grows in fields, that it looks harmless, and it is about to become the most dangerous thing to ever enter China. Opium. But here, in Chapter 3, we aren't there yet. Right now, we're focusing on the beginning. The moment when the Western world first looks east with a hungry gaze, imagining profits, power, and influence. The ocean still looks peaceful, but waves that look gentle can hide things beneath the surface. And very soon, those foreign ships will return, not just with curiosity, but with a plan that will change China forever. Let's drift into Chapter 4, where things start becoming just a little stressful. Not loud or dramatic yet, just quietly complicated. Like when you open your fridge and realize someone has eaten all the good snacks, but left the empty box inside. This chapter is about a problem. A slow, growing, silver-draining problem. Something that kept British officials awake at night and made Chinese officials shrug like, not our issue. This, my friend, is the trade imbalance. China sells. Europe buys. Simple. But not good. Let's start with something obvious. China was producing goods the world absolutely adored. Tea, the drink that made Britain function. Silk, soft, shiny, luxurious porcelain, delicate, beautiful, and perfect for fancy dinner tables. Europe loved all of this. But China, on the other hand, didn't care much for European products. It wasn't personal. China just felt like it already had everything it needed. Imagine offering your friend a cheap plastic bowl when they already have shelves full of golden plates. Yeah, that was Europe's problem. What did China want in return? Silver. Only silver. That was their rule. No silver? No trade. Simple, but brutal for Europe. The silver river flowing out of Europe. Europe began losing silver at an unbelievable rate. Picture silver coins marching out of British pockets, boarding ships, crossing oceans, and ending up in Chinese treasuries where they stacked up like little shiny mountains. British officials were worried. Actually, worried might be too soft. They were panicking, politely, of course, because they were British. They asked their merchants, "Can't you sell them something? Anything?" And the merchants replied, "We tried. They don't want anything except silver and tea." Tea had become such an essential part of British life that running out of it would probably cause a national meltdown. That if you think people today can't function without coffee, imagine Britain without tea. Absolute chaos. So the British kept buying tea, and even more tea, and the silver kept disappearing. China didn't see a problem now. Let's glide back to China. While Europe was stressing out, China was living its best life. Silver flowing in, great. Foreign nations paying huge amounts for Chinese goods, even better. The Qing government didn't see any issue at all. In fact, they felt validated, like the world finally understood how amazing China was. From the emperor's point of view, China sells, foreigners buy, everyone bows. Perfect system. But beneath the calm surface, a tiny ripple was forming. China believed the silver would always keep flowing in. But history had other plans. A closed market creates a pressure cooker because China didn't allow open trade. Foreign merchants had limited options. They were only allowed into Guangzhou, only during certain seasons, and only through specific Chinese merchants called the Kohoinged. No competition, no exploring new markets, no creative business deals. Everything was controlled, checked, monitored, and stamped with the empire's official approval. This system worked for centuries. But as European demand grew, the pressure on that one doorway increased. Imagine trying to push an entire supermarket through a single checkout line. That's basically how foreign merchants felt. And when pressure builds, something eventually breaks. The British start doing the math. Let's gently zoom into a boardroom somewhere in London. A group of serious-looking men sit around a big wooden table, wearing wigs that look like angry sheep. They stare at financial reports, numbers, charts, all of which say the same thing. Britain is losing silver fast. China is getting richer. This is not sustainable. Someone taps the table and says, "We can't keep buying tea like this." But the public wants tea. Then we need them to want something from us. And that simple idea becomes a national headache. What does China want? What will China buy? What product can reverse this silver flow? They debate everything. Wool? No machines? No cloth? Absolutely not. British food? China said, "No thanks," before even tasting it. It seemed hopeless. The imbalance becomes a warning signal. Silver left Europe, prices rose. Merchants complained. Bankers got nervous. Politicians argued. Newspapers warned of disaster. And all the while, China relaxed. Tea harvest? Good. Silk production? Strong. Trade profits? Growing. Silver reserves? Shiny and enormous. The Qing court saw no need to change anything. They trusted their traditions, they trusted their system, they trusted their strength. But the British saw something different. A giant, wealthy market locked behind a closed door. A door they were determined to open, one way or another. Slow tension, like clouds gathering. Let's imagine the world situation as a sky. Over China, clear, calm, blue. Over Britain, a few gray clouds forming. The trade imbalance wasn't a storm yet, but it was the early sign of one. European frustration grew quietly at first, then loudly. Diplomats sent letters. Merchants sent requests. Everyone tried convincing China to open more ports for trade. China's response every time? No, a calm, polite, unshakable no. China didn't see the imbalance as a problem, But Britain saw it as a threat to their economy, their trade power, and honestly, their tea supply. And nothing comes between Britain and its tea. A dangerous idea begins to form as the chapter moves toward its end. Imagine a dim room somewhere in India, controlled by the British East India Company. Men sit around quietly, maps on the wall, trade reports on the table, silver loss calculations spread everywhere. Someone says it softly. There is one product China might want. Another replies, but it's illegal in China. The first man shrugs. Illegal, but profitable. And just like that, a terrible idea begins to take shape. Opium. A product addictive enough to create demand, powerful enough to reverse the silver flow, and dangerous enough to destroy families, cities, and eventually, an entire empire. But that comes later. For now, in this chapter, the imbalance is the seed. A quiet seed that will grow into a disaster. Britain has a problem. China ignores it, and history begins to shift, slowly, silently, inevitably. Picture this. It's a quiet evening in a small riverside town in southern China. The lanterns flicker softly, merchants pack up their stalls, and the streets start to empty. Everything looks normal, peaceful, almost sleepy, but behind this calm, something else is crawling its way in. Opium. Not loud, not flashy. Just a slow, creeping shadow slipping through the cracks of the empire. Let's roll into this chapter like we're floating downstream on one of those wooden boats. Smooth, slow, and kind of cozy, just how bedtime history should be. The slow spread begins at first. Opium wasn't some giant crisis. It didn't arrive with trumpets or storms. It started small, tiny smoke clouds rising from quiet corners of towns. People tried it out of curiosity. A puff here, a puff there. Someone saying, "Bro, trust me, it's relaxing." Then another person tries it. Then another, and boom, the ember starts glowing. Even though the Qing government had strict rules, very strict, like do not even think about it strict, opium kept sliding in through ports, rivers, and sneaky trade routes. British ships bring more than tea while China was chilling with tea, silk, and porcelain. British traders had discovered that opium was the one thing Chinese people couldn't resist. You know how every friend group has that one guy who brings something questionable to the party? Yeah, Britain was that guy. Their ships arrived looking innocent from the outside, but inside, stacked, packed, loaded with opium bricks that would later spread across the empire like wildfire. They sold it to smugglers. The smugglers sold it to dealers. The dealers passed it into towns, villages, and even the capital. Before long, China's clean air started to smell like smoke. Why people fell for it, let's be honest. Life back then wasn't always easy. Farmers worked long days. Merchants traveled far with heavy loads. Scholars studied endless pages of classic texts that could put anyone to sleep. Opium felt like a little escape, a moment of peace, a soft cloud to hide inside. People didn't know it was addictive. They just knew it made them feel warm, calm, and finally rest. But as demand grew, so did the problem. What started as a way to relax slowly became something people needed. And that's when the shadow got darker. Smugglers thrive in the dark since the Qing government had banned opium. The trade moved underground, literally and figuratively. Secret warehouses, hidden caves, nighttime river runs with boats sliding through mist like ghosts. Smuggling became a full-time business. And trust me, these guys were pros. They knew every backwater, every guard's break time, every loophole. The British didn't even have to step foot on Chinese land anymore. They anchored their ships off the coast. Chinese smugglers did the rest. It was like a dark relay race, one that no one wanted to end. Corruption starts to spread too, and here's where things get even messier. Some officials pretended they didn't see it. Some happily took bribes. Some looked the other way because, well, their bosses were also looking the other way. Opium didn't just cloud people's minds, it clouded the government too. And once corruption slips into the system, it spreads faster than gossip at a village wedding. The Qing court finally notices. Imagine the emperor sitting in his grand palace in Beijing, enjoying peace, believing his empire is steady and loyal. Then reports start coming in. Your Majesty, opium is everywhere. Your Majesty, people are falling sick. Your Majesty, silver is flowing out of the country. Your Majesty, we might have a problem. At first, they didn't believe it. How could a foreign drug reach so deeply into a powerful empire? But eventually, the smoke became too thick to ignore. The Qing court realized something big was happening, something dangerous, quiet, and growing. Everyday life begins to change. Shops stayed open later. People spent money they didn't have. Farmers skipped work. Families worried. Sleepers in opium dens lay on bamboo beds for hours, lost in dreamlike clouds. China wasn't collapsing, not yet, but tiny cracks were appearing across society, and cracks, when ignored, eventually turn into broken walls. A storm forming in the distance. The opium trade was no longer just a shady side hustle. It was a threat, a slow-moving wave rolling toward the heart of China. The British wanted profit. Chinese smugglers wanted silver. Users wanted escape. Officials wanted to hide the problem. And the emperor wanted to crush it all before it exploded. Spoiler: he didn't know the explosion was already coming. He didn't know that soon this smoke would turn into fire. He didn't know that China was walking straight into a war that would change everything. But for now, the empire slept on, unaware that the storm clouds were gathering. Imagine waking up one morning, checking your pockets, and realizing your money is kind of disappearing. Not because you spent it, not because someone stole it, but because it's quietly flowing out of your house like water leaking from a crack in the floor. That's exactly what was happening to China. Not to a person, not to a town, but to the entire empire. Let's drift into this chapter gently. Like we're watching the sun rise over the Yangtze River, China's treasure chest begins to empty. For centuries, China had something the whole world wanted: beautiful tea, fine silk, smooth porcelain. And guess what people paid with? Silver. Lots of it. China didn't need foreign goods. China didn't want foreign goods. China simply took silver and sent out tea leaves and shiny pottery in return. The treasure chest stayed full. The economy stayed strong. Life stayed steady. But then opium entered the chat, and the entire balance flipped upside down. Opium in, silver out. Opium didn't just bring addiction. It brought a massive economic leak. When people in China bought opium, what did they use? Not tea, not silk, not rice. They paid in silver, the same silver that once made China one of the wealthiest empires on earth. And remember, the British weren't spending that silver back inside China. They took it home to the money flowed out and out and out like a slow-motion disaster no one could stop. The government begins to panic in Beijing. Officials started noticing the numbers: silver reserves dropping, coins becoming rare, market prices jumping like they were on fire. One official probably stared at the ledger like, Your Majesty, this is not good. People couldn't pay taxes properly. Merchants had trouble buying and selling. Even farmers struggled because tools and seeds became more expensive. Silver was the empire's heartbeat. And now, that heartbeat was getting weaker. Everyday people feel the pressure in tea shops. People whispered about rising prices. In markets, merchants argued about shrinking coins. Families held on to whatever little savings they had, worried about tomorrow. And it wasn't just money. The loss of silver made China look weak. To foreign powers, weakness, in politics, is like the smell of food in front of a hungry cat. Soon enough, other nations started circling around. Opium dealers get rich, too rich while the empire struggled. The smugglers? Oh, they were living their best lives. Some of them went from poor fishermen to wealthy traders. Some built giant houses on the coast. Some even hired private guards. Because when you're controlling a river of silver, life gets fancy fast. The government saw this and felt even more embarrassed. How could illegal traders get richer while the emperor's treasury shrank? Something had to change, and fast. China tries to fight back. Slowly, the Qing court finally started cracking down harder. New rules, new bans, more patrol boats, more searches. But there was one big problem: corruption. So many officials were already taking bribes from smugglers that laws became just words on paper. And every time the emperor shouted, "Stop the opium," half the officials quietly whispered, "Sure, Your Majesty," while secretly thinking, "But after I collect my bribe." It was a mess. Silver shortage turned serious as silver slipped away. China switched to using copper coins more heavily. But copper wasn't stable. Copper prices jumped like a nervous rabbit. Everyone was confused. Trade became risky. Farmers suffered the most. It wasn't just an economic problem anymore. It was becoming a full-blown national crisis. And all because of one smoky little product. The calm before the clash. By now, the emperor knew he couldn't ignore the problem anymore. Opium was no longer a Shadow in the back alleys, IT was poisoning the economy, draining the treasury, twisting society, and making China vulnerable. The British knew this. Chinese smugglers knew this. Even everyday people felt something big was coming. A tension hung in the air, like the moment right before thunder cracks. China didn't know it, but the empire was inching closer to a confrontation that would shake the world. That a clash was coming. And soon, the first spark would light the fuse. Slow down your mind for a moment. Imagine the forbidden city at dawn. The red walls glowing softly, the rooftops stretching like dragon backs, and court officials slowly shuffling into the great halls, rubbing their sleepy eyes. Everything looks peaceful from the outside, but inside, the storm is finally starting to rumble. The empire may be calm, but the court is not. Not anymore. Whispers become worries for years. Officials whispered about the growing opium problem, soft comments, quiet hallway conversations, the little my lord. Things are getting bad, here and there. But now the whispers were getting louder. Reports from the south were piling up on desks. Letters from governors started sounding panicked. Merchants complained. Farmers complained. Even soldiers complained. And when everyone complains, you know it's serious. The emperor hears the echo inside his palace. The emperor finally began to feel the pressure. Opium wasn't just a moral problem anymore. That IT wasn't just some illegal smoke making people dizzy. That IT had become a national headache. One that throbbed louder every day. So, he gathered his most trusted advisors. Imagine a room full of old men with long beards, long robes, and even longer opinions. They debated, they argued, some shouted, some sighed dramatically. One probably fell asleep. Hey, it happens in long meetings. But the emperor listened. He knew something big had to be done. The court splits into two sides as the discussions continued. The Qing court slowly split into two camps. One, it's fine, we'll handle it later gang. These officials wanted softer policies. They believed opium was bad, sure, but not worth starting conflict over. Some thought people just needed better moral education. Yeah, good luck with that. Two, we must crush this now gang. These were the strict officials. The ones who wanted to wipe out the opium trade completely. Burn the drugs, punish the dealers, chase out foreign traders. Basically, full-on crackdown mode. And standing among these strict voices was one name that would soon change everything. Lin Zexu. But we'll get to him soon. Don't worry. Tension rises in the halls. The debates got heated. Some officials blamed the British. Some blamed smugglers. Some said China should block all foreign ships completely. Others argued that foreign trade was important for the economy. It was like watching a very slow, very polite government version of a group chat fight. But in the middle of all this noise, a bigger fear grew. If China doesn't stop the opium trade soon, the empire might lose control entirely. And nobody wanted to report that to the emperor. The emperor demands action finally, after weeks of debates, arguments, and more paperwork than anyone deserves. The emperor made his decision. Enough waiting. Enough pretending the problem would go away. He needed someone brave, strict, smart, and disciplined. Someone who could take on smugglers, foreign merchants, and even corrupt officials. Someone who wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. The empire needed a hero. And that's when one name echoed through the Forbidden City. Send for Lin Zexu. A shift in the air. This decision sent a shockwave through the court. Officials whispered. Foreign traders felt uneasy. Smugglers broke into cold sweats, and the common people could sense something changing. The calm years were over. The real battle had begun, quietly, behind palace doors, and soon, it would break out into the open. Eyes on the south. The emperor ordered Lin Zexu to travel south, to Guangdong, the center of the opium trade, the doorway to foreign merchants, and the heart of the crisis. This wasn't just a mission. It was a test. Could a single determined man stop a wave that had already flooded half the empire? Could one leader turn the tide? Could anyone stop opium's grip on China? The court didn't know. But they were about to find out. Picture a calm morning in the Forbidden City. Soft sunlight pours over red walls. The palace guards shift quietly. And a gentle breeze moves through the courtyards. In the middle of this peaceful scene, a man walks with steady footsteps, serious, focused, and carrying the weight of an entire empire on his shoulders. This man is Lin Zexu. He's not flashy, not dramatic, not the type to make big speeches or throw furniture around during meetings. But he is the type who sees a problem and actually does something about it. And now, he's about to take on the biggest problem China has faced in centuries. That a man of discipline, Lin Zexu was known for a few things. He didn't take bribes, that he didn't play political games, he didn't fear powerful people, and he absolutely hated corruption. You could almost say he was the no-nonsense uncle of the Qing government. If he saw something wrong, he fixed it. If someone lied, he exposed them. If someone acted shady, he shut it down. Basically, if you were corrupt, he was the last person you wanted knocking on your door. The emperor sends him south. When the emperor summoned Lin Zexu and told him to go stop the opium crisis, he didn't hesitate. N.O. dramatic gasped. N.O. Your Majesty, are you sure? No excuses, just a calm nod. He packed his bags, gathered his team, and started the long journey south to Guangdong, the beating heart of the opium trade. Imagine him riding in a carriage, looking out the window, thinking, okay, time to clean up this mess. Traveling through a changing empire. As Lin Zexu traveled deeper into the southern provinces, he began to see the damage himself. Farmers who couldn't work, merchants losing their businesses, families broken, young men lost in opium haze. He saw opium dens tucked into alleys, smoke drifting out like ghostly fingers. He saw boats loaded with suspicious-looking cargo. He saw officials pretending everything was fine. And with every mile, his resolve grew stronger. This stops now, he must have thought, tightening his jaw. A leader with a mission. Most officials would have tried to play it safe. Most would have aimed for minimum effort, maximum comfort. But not Lin Zexu. He wanted results. Real results. That he didn't care if people got upset. He didn't care if foreign traders argued. He didn't care if corrupt officials panicked. He cared only about protecting his country. That it was kind of like watching a calm, polite teacher walk into a rowdy classroom, and everyone instantly sits up straight. Foreign traders start to worry as news spread that Lin Zexu was coming. British merchants in Guangdong felt their hearts drop into their shoes. They knew his reputation. They knew he wasn't someone you could bribe with a bag of silver. They knew hiding opium was about to get a whole lot harder. Some traders started secretly moving their stockpiles. Some began discussing backup plans. And some pretended everything was fine, even though it very much wasn't. You can almost imagine them whispering, "Guys, we might have a problem." A calm before the clash. By the time Lin Zexu reached Guangdong, the city wasn't the same calm trading hub it used to be. The tension was thick. People watched from balconies. Merchants whispered in tea shops. Smugglers felt the pressure rising. Something big was coming, and everyone knew it. Lin Zexu arrived quietly, without fanfare. No parade, no celebration. Just a determined man stepping into a storm. He looked around, assessed the situation, and then thought, all right, let's begin. The first steps toward a showdown. Lin Zexu didn't waste time. He started gathering records. He met with local officials. He questioned merchants. He inspected ports. He sent spies to watch smugglers. And with each new piece of information, the picture grew clearer. The opium crisis wasn't just bad. It was enormous. But lucky for China, the empire had sent the one man stubborn enough and brave enough to take it on. And very soon, Lin Zexu would confront the people who were feeding the crisis head-on. Let's drift into this chapter slowly, like we're walking through the humid streets of Guangdong at dusk. Lanterns glow softly. Boats bump gently against the docks. Shops close one by one. And somewhere in the heart of the city, Lin Zexu is rolling up his sleeves. Because before he can fight opium, he has to deal with something just as dangerous: corruption, the quiet poison inside the government. Lin Zexu takes the wheel. When Lin Zexu arrived in Guangdong, he didn't rest. He didn't unpack his bags. He didn't go sightseeing. Nope, he went straight into let's fix this now mode. He summoned local officials. He asked for reports. He requested names, numbers, records, shipments, everything. And he didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't soften. He was here to clean house. Some officials start sweating. Many officials in Guangdong had been, let's say, looking the other way when smugglers passed by. Some had taken bribes. Some pretended opium didn't exist. Some even protected dealers. But now, Lin Zexu walks in like the strict teacher no one wants to disappoint. One look from him was enough to make guilty officials sit up straight, clutch their robes, and think, oh no, he knows. And he did know. Records reveal the ugly truth as documents piled up on his desk. A painful reality became clear. Some officials were earning more from opium bribes than from their actual salaries. Some port officers accidentally missed searching certain boats. Some local leaders wrote fake reports saying everything is fine, when absolutely nothing was fine. The corruption ran deep, too deep. But Lin Zexa didn't panic. He didn't yell that, he simply noted every name, every detail, every lie, and quietly planned his next move. Interrogations begin. Lin Zexa wasn't cruel, that he wasn't violent, he was just extremely straightforward. When he called officials in for questioning, he didn't waste time. Did you accept bribes? How many smugglers did you meet? Why didn't you report the opium ships? And the officials, some begged, some cried, some pretended to faint, some tried blaming others, some blamed stress, some blamed bad memory. And Lin Zexa just sat there thinking, wow, and these are the people running the ports. Punishments fall like rain, but this wasn't just talk. Lin Zexa took action. Officials who were caught lying lost their positions. Officials who took bribes were arrested. Some were forced to pay heavy fines. Some were kicked out of the government completely. It shocked the whole province. People in tea houses whispered, "Did you hear? Lin Zexa fired another one today. He's cleaning out the whole department. He's not scared of anyone." And honestly, he wasn't. Smugglers looked for a place to hide as corrupt officials were punished. Smugglers realized their safe network was crumbling. The guards they used to bribe were gone. The officers who protected them disappeared. The secret routes they used were now under watch. Suddenly, their easy business wasn't so easy anymore. Some fled into the countryside. Some hid their boats. Some tried to act innocent like, "Opium? Never heard of it. I only sell, dried fish." Sure, buddy. The people start to hope for the first time in a long time. Regular citizens felt a shift. Merchants noticed fewer shady deals. Villagers saw fewer smugglers passing through at night. Parents whispered to each other, maybe things will get better. Maybe the government is finally taking this seriously. Maybe this Lin Zexa guy is the real deal. Hope spread softly, like a warm breeze that a city braces for what comes next. By cleaning up corruption, Lin Zexa wasn't just fixing the government. He was preparing for the real battle, stopping the foreign opium trade. That he knew that cleaning out the insiders was only step one. The next step, facing the British traders themselves, the ones who controlled the opium, the ones who defended it, the ones who weren't going to back down easily. But Lin Zexa was ready, calm, steady, focused, because this wasn't just a job anymore. It was a mission, and soon, the entire world would feel the impact of the steps he was about to take. Now let's drift gently into Chapter 10, like we're walking down a quiet Guangdong street at night. The air is warm. Lanterns swing softly. Shadows stretch across the stone path. Everything feels calm on the surface, but behind that calm, behind closed doors and hidden alleys, a darker world waits. This is the underworld Lin Zexa is determined to uncover. Smoke behind every door. As Lin Zexa dug deeper into the opium situation, he discovered something unsettling. Opium dens were everywhere. Not just in big cities. Not just in shady corners. They were tucked into warehouses, fishing huts, tea shops underground, basements, abandoned rooms, 7 old boats tied quietly along the river. If there was a roof and a door, someone had probably turned it into a smoke room. From the outside, these dens looked normal. Inside, a completely different world. That a walk through the dens, imagine stepping into one of these places. The room is dim, lit only by a few oil lamps. The air is thick, so thick you could probably slice it like a cake. People lie on bamboo beds, half asleep, holding long pipes. Some whisper soft dreams. Some stare blankly into space. Some don't even notice when someone walks past them. It's quiet. Too quiet, a chilling kind of quiet. The kind that feels like time itself is slowing down. Lin Zexa's officers make their rounds one by one. The dens were found. Some were discovered by accident. Some were revealed by angry neighbors. Some were betrayed by the smell alone. Seriously, the smoke was that strong. Lin Zexa sent out patrols day and night. His officers kicked open doors. They checked warehouses. They dug through crates. They opened suspicious boxes like, "Let's see rice? Tea? Nope. More opium." And every time they found a hidden room, another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The crisis wasn't small. It wasn't isolated. It was a giant underground system. A shadow city inside the real one. People lost in the fog. Some of the scenes Lin Zexa's men found were heartbreaking. Young men who couldn't stand without help. Fathers who had sold everything for more opium. Workers who forgot to show up for their jobs. Families begging officials to save their sons. Opium had wrapped itself around there. Lives like vines around a tree. Slow, silent, and deadly. It wasn't just a drug anymore. It was a trap, a hidden industry. Lin Zexu realized the opium dens weren't acting alone. Behind them was a whole hidden industry. Transporters, secret sellers, small-time brokers, wealthy backers, corrupt guards, foreign traders, waiting offshore, local gangs, protecting trade routes. Everyone had a role. Everyone had something to gain. And money, silver, shiny silver, was flowing like a river from addicted hands straight into the pockets of traders and smugglers. This wasn't some small operation. It was a machine. A giant, dangerous machine. The public starts to wake up. More dens were discovered and shut down. People in the towns began to notice. Some watched nervously from their doorways. Some whispered in tea houses. Some nodded approvingly. Some were worried because, honestly, they weren't sure how far Lin Zexu would go. Whispers spread. Did you hear? 3 more dens closed today. They say Lin Zexu didn't even sleep last night. He's hunting them one by one. Little by little, ordinary people began to see that this wasn't just a government mission. It was a rescue mission. A fight for their communities. A fight for their children. Lin Zexu's determination solidifies with every den exposed. Lin Zexu's resolve grew stronger. He wasn't just angry. He wasn't just disappointed. He was heartbroken for his people. And he was furious at those who profited from their suffering. He knew now. This wasn't just about stopping opium. It was about saving an empire. But he also knew something darker. If this is what the hidden underworld looks like, what are the foreign traders hiding behind their walls? The bigger battle was getting closer. Much closer. When news reached Britain about what was happening in China, the whole country seemed to freeze for a moment and then explode like a kettle left on the fire for too long. People in London didn't wake up expecting drama. It was a normal morning. Horses pulling carts, newspapers being sold on the corner, tea being poured in fancy cups. Everything felt peaceful. But as soon as the reports arrived, the atmosphere changed. The British government read the messages from China, and the reaction was simple. Pure fury. Not the loud, screaming kind of fury. No. This was that cold, angry silence. The kind where someone just stares at you with the, "Oh, you messed up now," expression. It was the kind of anger that leads to big decisions. And those big decisions were going to change the world. Suddenly, Britain felt insulted, challenged, and ready to respond with all its power. And trust me, Britain had a lot of power. A quiet country turned serious at first. Most people in Britain only knew bits and pieces of the story. They heard that Chinese officials had destroyed British opium and pushed back against the opium trade. But once the newspapers printed the full story, the streets buzzed like a marketplace at noon. Some people were angry because they felt Britain's honor had been attacked. Others were furious because the opium traders were demanding protection. And many politicians said something along the lines of, "This is unacceptable. How dare China treat British merchants like this?" There were speeches in Parliament. Loud debates. Men waving papers in the air. One man even shouted so hard he almost fell over, which honestly would have made the whole moment funnier. Everyone agreed on one thing. Britain needed to respond. And in their minds, respond didn't mean writing a polite letter. It meant gathering the Navy. The same Navy that was known across the world for being extremely good at, well, winning. Ships began to stir down by the harbors. Everything changed fast. Just a few days earlier, the ports were calm. Sailors were relaxing, singing songs, eating bread that was probably too hard to chew. The sea was peaceful. The biggest worry some men had was whether the captain would let them take a longer break. But then the orders came. And when the British Navy receives orders, things happen quickly. Sailors began running around, preparing the ships. Cannons were cleaned. Powder was stocked. Food, mostly hard biscuits and salted meat, nothing too delicious, was loaded on board. The mood felt different now. Serious. Focused. A bit tense. The ships that had been resting quietly were now turning into war machines. One sailor reportedly said, "Guess we're not going on a holiday then." Another replied, "Yeah, unless your idea of a holiday is sailing halfway across the world to fight a war." He wasn't wrong. The roar of the Empire Britain in the 1800s wasn't just a country. It was an empire stretching across oceans and continents. And when the empire decided to take action, the whole world paid attention. Leaders met in grand rooms with carpets that probably cost more than an entire village. They spoke in strong voices, their decisions shaping the journey of thousands of men. Their message was simple: send the fleet. The purpose was clear: force China to open its ports, protect British traders, and make China pay for the destroyed opium. Britain wasn't just angry. It wanted control, influence, and power. Soon, newspapers printed headlines that sounded dramatic enough to be movie titles. People in cafes talked non-stop about the China situation, and young men whispered with excitement about joining the Navy, imagining adventure, not fully understanding the horror and chaos of war. Sailing toward China when the fleet finally left Britain, it wasn't one ship or two ships. It was a whole formation, powerful, organized, and ready. The harbor filled with noise. Ropes tightened. Anchors rose. Waves slapped against the wooden hulls. Sailors shouted orders from the deck. Smoke curled from the chimneys as steam engines roared to life on newer ships. And slowly, the fleet began sliding away from the shore, leaving thin white trails behind them. Families stood on the docks waving. Some cried. Some cheered. Some just stared, silent, knowing that many of those men might not return. The ships headed into open water, and the journey began. Across the sea, across storms, across endless days of boredom, bad food, and the constant smell of salt. But underneath all that, one fact remained: Britain was coming. And it wasn't coming to talk out a storm that looked calm while the ships sailed. Britain back home tried to appear calm and controlled, like everything was under perfect management. But in truth, everyone knew this was serious business. Merchants waited, nervous. Politicians argued. The public read newspapers every morning, looking for updates. Behind the calm surface, there was tension, almost like the quiet before a storm. Except this storm was traveling across the ocean with cannons, muskets, and the world's strongest navy behind it. The humor of the situation, kind of. Even though things were heating up, some funny moments still happened. One sailor packed 12 pairs of socks because he thought China would be cold. Another asked if they'd see giant dragons. Someone else wondered if Chinese food tasted better than the brick-like bread on the ship. Spoiler: yes, it did. Life on board was cramped, loud, and, let's be honest, stinky. But the men joked to keep their spirits up. They told stories, sang songs, and tried not to think too much about the war waiting for them. And yet, despite all the jokes, every man knew this mission was huge. The calm before history changes as the fleet pushed forward. The world was slowly moving toward a turning point. Britain's anger wasn't just the reaction of a country. It was the spark that would soon become the First Opium War. But at this exact moment in our chapter, we freeze time. The ships are still moving. The sea is still wide. The wind is still blowing in the sails. Britain is furious. China is standing firm. And two massive powers are on a collision course. But for now, the world is quiet. Just waves, wood, wind, and the distant sound of sailors laughing on deck, because they don't yet know how history is about to unfold. That let's float into chapter 12, nice and slow, like a small boat drifting along a calm river at sunset. But just because the river looks peaceful doesn't mean the storm isn't coming. And now, the storm has finally reached China's shores. This is the moment the First Opium War begins. Not with a roar, not with a giant boom, but with a strange mix of confusion, shock, and wait. They can do that. A war nobody was ready for. China didn't expect war. Not really. They thought maybe Britain would complain, maybe argue, maybe send some angry letters written in very fancy English handwriting. But sending huge warships, with cannons that could send a message louder than any letter? No one saw that coming. Meanwhile, Britain had spent months preparing. Their ships were loaded, their sailors were trained, their cannons were polished until they could probably see their own reflections. China, on the other hand, well, let's just say their navy looked more like a group of kind fishing boats that got dragged into a boxing match by accident. The first clash at sea. Picture this: a quiet morning. The ocean is calm, the sky is soft. Chinese sailors are doing normal sailor things, tying ropes, boiling water for tea, chatting about fish. Then, far away, dots appear on the horizon. The dots get bigger and bigger and bigger. They turn into giant British warships, tall, iron-mouthed beasts of the sea. The Chinese sailors stare like, wow, those are really big. The British ships move with confidence, like they're arriving at a party they were invited to. China's ships, they're wooden, light, and honestly, not built for a modern war. It's like one side brought fireworks, and the other side brought a candle. Cannons speak first, a deep boom breaks the quiet. Then another, and another. British cannons let loose, and the sky fills with smoke. The water shakes. Birds probably think the world is ending. Chinese sailors scramble. Where's that sound coming from? Why is the ocean splashing like this? Hey, my hat flew off. But confusion doesn't stop the British attacks. Their cannons reach far, much farther than China ever expected. Chinese cannons fire back, but the shells fall short. Some plop into the water like stones someone tossed for fun. China's ships simply cannot match the range. This moment reveals the truth. China is fighting a war it was not prepared for. A power imbalance in motion. Britain's navy is like a fully trained athlete. China's navy is like someone who just woke up from a nap. That it's not fair. It's not balanced. That it's not even close. British ships have stronger cannons, faster reload time, better trained sailors, steam power, stronger iron hulls, long-range guns, decades of naval experience. China has courage. A lot of courage. But courage isn't always enough when the enemy has technology that feels like it came from the future. The battle moves to the coast. After the first sea clashes, British ships glide toward the Pearl River. They pass forts, towers, and watchmen who can only stare and wonder, how are we supposed to stop machines like these? China's cannons fire from the forts, but again, the range is too short. Their cannonballs bounce off the British hulls like pebbles thrown at a metal pot. British officers watch calmly, hands behind their backs, like, yes, yes. Interesting. They're trying. Then they fire back. One British cannon blast can take out a whole Chinese fort wall. It's like comparing a hammer to a whisper. Sailors on both sides react. Chinese sailors feel fear and confusion. Some grip the ropes so tightly their hands shake. Some shout orders. Some wonder how things got this bad. But to their credit, they do not run. They try. They stand. They fight. Even when their ships begin to burn, many refuse to abandon their posts. On the British side, sailors are shocked too, but for a different reason. Some say, is this really their navy? Are we fighting boats or floating houses? This feels wrong. Many British sailors even feel sympathy. This was not a fair fight. The war spreads. The battles don't stay in one place. Every few weeks, another clash happens. A fort falls. A river is blocked. A city is threatened. A village hears cannon thunder from far away. Chinese villagers watch smoke rise from the coastline and whisper, is this the end? What is happening out there? Why are foreign ships attacking us? No one has clear answers, and no one knows how long this will last. The more the British advance, the more China realizes that this war is unlike anything they've ever faced. China's defense struggles. The Qing officials do what they can. They send reinforcements. They order repairs. They set up new cannons. They build more barricades. But many soldiers have never seen modern war. Many cannons are too old. Many leaders are confused by British strategies. Sometimes orders are late. Sometimes messages get lost. Sometimes commanders argue instead of fight. China is trying to stop a flood using buckets. The mood in the empire grows. Heavy news travels fast. People hear stories. British guns can hit targets we can't even see. One blast destroys a whole wall. Our ships burn easily. And slowly, fear begins to spread. The empire starts to understand. This is not just about opium anymore. This is a fight for survival. But even then, China has hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, courage, unity, and sheer determination can hold back the foreign storm. Because empires don't fall easily. Especially not ones that have stood for centuries. Still, the first days of war show the truth. The mountain is shaking. The storm is here. And the empire stands at the edge of something it has never faced. Before let's drift into chapter 13. Soft, slow, like a cold breeze moving through the palace halls in Beijing. Far from the noise of cannons, the forbidden city sits quiet. Golden roofs, red walls, peaceful courtyards. You wouldn't believe a war is happening, but inside those walls, inside the emperor's court, a storm is raging just as loudly as the ones along the coast, because news of the first defeats has reached Beijing. And everyone is panicking. Thunder in the court. Imagine a huge hall filled with Long robes, nervous faces, and the sound of officials clearing their throats every 5 seconds. A messenger kneels and reads the latest battle report. British ships arrived. Their guns hit from very far. Our cannons could not reach. Ships lost. Forts damaged. The room falls silent. Then suddenly, boom. Arguments start everywhere. One official says, "This can't be true. Foreigners cannot have guns stronger than ours." Another replies, "Sir, the report literally says they blew up a stone wall in one shot." Someone else jumps in. "Maybe the wall was already weak." Another guy shakes his head. "No, I saw that wall last year. Very strong wall." And somewhere in the back, an old minister whispers, "I told everyone this would happen, but nobody listens to old people." The whole hall becomes a noisy marketplace of confused adults who don't know what to do. The emperor tries to stay calm. At the center of it all sits the Daoguang emperor. He listens quietly, but inside, he's anxious. He lifts his cup of tea, takes a slow sip, and sighs. This wasn't the problem he expected to face this year. He was thinking about taxes, harvests, maybe fixing some roads. Instead, foreign warships with giant cannons. That it's safe to say this ruined his morning, and probably his week. Who is responsible for this? Every empire, when things go wrong, asks the same question. Whose fault is this? The Qing court doesn't disappoint. Some blame the coastal officials. "You should have prepared better." Some blame the generals. "You should have fought harder." Some blame the British. "They are too aggressive." One brave or clueless official even suggests, maybe the weather helped them. Everyone stares at him. He pretends to cough and looks at the floor. But deep down, the emperor knows the truth. China was not prepared. Not for this kind of enemy. Not for this kind of war. Trying to understand British power at this point, most Chinese officials have never seen a British warship. They've never seen a steam engine. Never seen long-range guns. So they start guessing. And their guesses are interesting. One official suggests the British ships move so fast because they have magic wind. Another thinks the British cannons use fire from dragons. Someone else claims foreigners eat strange food that makes them very strong. The emperor listens to all this and probably thinks, am I running a government or a school for wild stories? But between the nonsense, a few smart voices speak up. We need better knowledge of their weapons. We must study their ships. We cannot keep pretending they are weak. These quiet, reasonable voices are often ignored, but they're the ones who understand what's happening. The search for answers begins. The emperor orders reports from every coastal commander. More messengers rush into Beijing. More bad news arrives. British ships too fast. Cannons too strong. Walls falling easily. Our shots too short. And the emperor keeps asking the same painful question. How can they hit us, but we cannot hit them? He gets many answers, most of them useless, but one message hits hard. They have new guns, new ships, new technology. We are using old weapons from old wars. This is the moment when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. China is fighting yesterday's battle against tomorrow's enemy. Blame falls on Lin Zexu as panic grows. The court starts turning on people. And the first name they point to, Lin Zexu. The man who destroyed the opium. The man who stood up for China. The man who tried to save the empire. Now many officials whisper, this war started because of him. He made the British angry. He acted without caution. He is too strict. It doesn't matter that he was right. That opium was killing the nation. That the crisis was growing long before he acted. In times of fear, people search for someone to blame. And poor Lin Zexu becomes the easiest target. The emperor hears these complaints. He frowns. He doesn't want to punish Lin Zexu, but the pressure is building, slowly, silently, like cracks forming in stone. China tries emergency fixes with chaos rising in the court. The Qing government tries everything. They send more soldiers. They order more cannons. They repair broken forts. They ask local governors for money. They even send letters to the British, hoping for peace. But none of this fixes the real problem. Technology. Training. Strategy. China is trying to put out a forest fire with buckets of water. The emperor knows this. The smart ministers know it too. But changing an empire is slow. And war? It doesn't wait. A quiet moment of reality late at night. After the officials leave, the emperor sits alone. The palace is quiet. Wind moves through the corridors. Candles flickered as he looks over the maps, the reports, the warnings. And he finally whispers words he hoped he'd never say. We are not ready. It's a soft admission, gentle, private, but it marks a turning point, because once a leader realizes a storm is bigger than he thought, he starts to prepare differently. He begins to think not just about stopping defeat, but surviving it. The empire holds its breath, and so China waits. The court waits. The generals wait. The emperor waits. Everyone knows the war has only just begun. And the next battles will be even harder. The Qing Empire stands tall and proud, but inside, a crack is spreading. Not enough to break the mountain. Not yet, but enough to remind everyone. The world is changing, and China must face that change. Whether it's ready or not, let's slip quietly into Chapter 14, like walking down a misty path at dawn, where everything feels calm but something heavy sits in the air. The war has begun. The first clashes are over. And now Britain is moving forward, slowly, confidently, like someone who believes nothing can stop them. China watches from the shorelines, from city walls, from riverbanks, hoping the storm will pass. But this storm isn't drifting away, that it's moving inland. The British advance begins after winning the first sea battles. The British commanders look at their maps and decide, all right then, let's go deeper. Their ships turn toward key Chinese ports, not far from Guangdong. Not small villages, but big, important places. Places where trade flows, taxes move, and people gather. The British strategy is simple. Take the ports, take the rivers, take control. Each step forward tightens the pressure on the Qing Empire, like a rope being pulled slowly, inch by inch. The march toward key cities, picture British ships gliding in a straight line, neat and organized, like ducks swimming in formation, but very dangerous. Ducks with giant cannons. They move toward important harbors, river entrances, trading hubs, city gates. Everywhere they appear, locals react the same way. They stop, they stare, they whisper. Some run home to warn their families. Some grab what they can before leaving town. Some just freeze, shocked by the sight of towering iron ships that look too big to be real. And honestly, who can blame them? For many Chinese villagers and townsfolk, this is the first time they've seen Western warships up close. And those ships look like floating mountains. China tries to resist at each port. Chinese defenders do their best. They roll out cannons. They call the soldiers. They prepare the walls. They shout orders. They hope for strength. But hopes don't win battles. When the British ships fire, the blasts echo for miles. Stone cracks. Dust clouds rise. People cover their ears. The defenders fire back, brave, determined, but their cannonballs fall short, like tossed pebbles. Sometimes a shot lands, sometimes it hits wood, but even when it does, the British ships just shrug it off. It's like punching a brick wall. Hard, painful, and not very effective. A quiet, painful realization. Slowly, painfully, the truth settles into Chinese hearts. The foreigners are not stopping, and they're not losing ground. Some soldiers whisper, how do we fight ships we can't reach? What magic do their guns use? Why is the world changing so fast? But no answer comes. Only more cannon fire. Port after port falls. The British forces move with the patience of a slow rainfall. Steady, constant, impossible to ignore. They capture one port, then another. Each fall feels like a door closing behind China. A door they might never open again. In some towns, defenders barely fight, knowing the outcome. In others, they fight fiercely, refusing to retreat. But the result is the same. British control grows, Chinese control shrinks, and the people caught in the middle feel the pressure. Villagers watch the war move closer in the countryside. People gather on hills to watch smoke rising in the distance. They hear the thunder of cannons, soft at first, then louder. Mothers pull their children inside. Farmers look up from their fields. Merchants hide their silver. Everyone feels the same fear. The war is coming closer. Even if the British don't enter their villages, the fear alone spreads like wildfire. Rumors travel faster than ships. I heard they can fire from miles away. I heard they took the port in one day. I heard their ships don't sink. People don't know what's real or exaggerated, but everything feels possible now. Britain controls the waterways. One of Britain's biggest strengths comes into play here. Control of the sea. With their powerful navy, they can block rivers, surround harbors, cut off supplies, and stop trade. China relies heavily on waterways. Food moves through rivers. Goods move through ports. Messages travel along the coast. Once the British take those routes, it's like choking the empire slowly, not killing it, not crushing it, just squeezing, little by little, making each breath harder. Chinese commanders try new ideas back in the forts and camps. Chinese generals start trying everything. New formations night attack small boats with fire-hurried repairs, desperate plans. Some ideas work for a moment, that a lucky shot hits a British ship, that a small victory stirs hope. But the British adapt quickly. Their experience at sea runs deep. Their weapons reload fast. Their ships move with purpose. Every Chinese attempt breaks against the same wall of iron and fire, tension without insults. Even though the war grows fierce, both sides show a strange mix of respect, curiosity, suspicion. British officers study Chinese defenses and say, they're brave. They're not giving up. Chinese commanders watch the British march and think, they are disciplined. Too disciplined. There are no cartoon villains here, no evil monsters. Just two worlds meeting in the worst way possible, with confusion and cannons instead of conversation. That China's leaders finally see the pattern as more reports reach Beijing. The pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The British move like a tide, slow but unstoppable, and every push goes deeper. The emperor hears this and feels the weight settle on his shoulders. The court debates endlessly. Some call for more troops, some call for peace, some blame each other, some blame fate. But one truth sits at the center of everything. The old ways are not enough anymore. The empire feels the strain by now. The war is more than just cannon blasts. Taxes drop, trade suffers, villagers flee, soldiers tire, officials argue. The empire, so large, so proud, so ancient, starts to feel the cracks widening, and the British ships keep moving, keep pushing, keep tightening the grip. Like a shadow that grows longer with each passing day. A calm but heavy ending as the sun sets on. This chapter, the coastline looks peaceful again. Waves roll gently, birds glide, fishermen repair their nets. But beneath that calm, ports are lost, rivers are controlled, and the British forces have stepped deeper into China than anyone ever imagined. The war has changed shape, that it's no longer just battles, that it's pressure, that it's movement, it's a long push toward the heart of an empire trying desperately to stay strong. And this is only the beginning. Let's step quietly into chapter 15, like walking through the long red corridors of the Forbidden City at sunrise. The palace looks calm on the outside. Silent courtyards, light drifting across the stone floors, guards standing straight as statues. But inside the emperor's chambers, chaos, absolute, elegant, fancy-robed chaos. Because the British have pushed deeper into China, and every new report feels like a bucket of cold water over the Qing court's head. Bad news arrives like morning tea. Every day at this point, messengers enter Beijing, so often they might ask. Well, install a revolving door at the palace gate. Point one messenger kneels, opens the scroll, and reads, Your Majesty, the British have taken another port. Another messenger arrives before the first one even stands up. Your Majesty, our cannons were too short again. A third messenger rushes in. Your Majesty, more ships spotted. The emperor sighs so much he might develop a headache as a permanent personality trait. The officials keep looking at him like, please don't be angry. We are trying. Kindly don't punish us. But honestly, nobody really knows what to do. The court erupts into arguments. The throne room becomes a storm of voices. Some officials shout, we must fight harder. We need more soldiers. Fire the lazy generals. Others yell back, no, no, no. We must negotiate. These foreigners are too strong. We need peace before everything is lost. And then there's always the one guy who says, maybe the British will get tired and go home. Everyone turns and stares at him, but he shrinks into his robe like a turtle. The emperor tries to keep order. The Daoguang emperor watches all this from his throne, trying to stay calm. That he rubs his forehead. He taps his fingers on the armrest. He drinks tea like it's medicine. Inside, he's thinking, this is not how my reign was supposed to go. He tries to restore order. Quiet. One at a time. But the moment one minister finishes talking, another jumps in. Words crash into each other. Voices rise like waves. The emperor looks like a man trying to stop a waterfall with one hand. Blame starts flying like arrows when people panic. They start pointing fingers, and now, the court becomes a blame factory. Some officials accuse the coastal generals, some accuse local governors, some accuse British trickery. Some accuse the weather. Yes, the weather again. Even Lin Zexu's name keeps popping up. He caused this war. He is too strict. He made the foreigners angry. Another minister argues. He was saving us. Opium was destroying the empire. But logic doesn't always win in a room full of frightened people. The emperor hears both sides and feels torn. Punish Lin Zexu? Protect him? Blame him? Praise him? It's a mess, trying to make new plans. Quickly, the emperor orders emergency meetings. Every day, sometimes twice a day, plans are made, changed, thrown away, rewritten, debated, forgotten, and then remade again. Some ideas are clever, some ideas are wild. Some ideas should not even be called ideas. One minister suggests, let's build bigger walls. Another says, let's send more men. Another says, let's send a giant letter asking the British to chill. Someone else suggests, maybe we attack at night? Silence. Then someone whispers, they have lanterns too. You know, China faces a hard truth after all the shouting, the plans, the confusion. A small group of wise ministers steps forward. Their tone is calm, their words slow and steady. Your Majesty, we are not losing because we lack courage, we are losing because we lack knowledge. The court grows quiet. They continue. The British have new guns, new ships, new methods. We cannot fight them with old ways. That truth sits heavily in the room, because they all know it's right. China is fighting a modern war with tools meant for a different century. The emperor's worries grow at night. When the palace falls silent, the emperor sits alone in his study. Candles flicker softly. Scrolls lie open in front of him. Reports pile up like small mountains on his table that he reads every line. And the weight on his shoulders grows heavier that he thinks about. The army, the ports, the people, the war, the future, and the strange foreign ships that seem impossible to stop. He whispers to himself, how did it come to this? The room doesn't answer. Pressure builds on every side. The emperor feels pressure from everywhere. Angry officials, frightened generals, desperate families, confused commanders, anxious citizens, and foreign powers demanding revenge. Every decision feels dangerous. Every delay feels costly. Every mistake feels enormous. Even choosing breakfast probably feels stressful at this point. Hope feels small, but not lost despite all the panic. The court tries to stay hopeful. Small victories are celebrated like miracles. Rumors of British struggles bring momentary smiles. Every new idea gives a tiny bit of courage. But deep down, the fear remains. What if the British push even further? What if the war reaches our big cities? What if the empire cannot hold? These questions echo quietly in the minds of every official. The empire stands on shaking ground by now. The Qing government is doing everything it can to stay strong. But the cracks in the empire are widening. Arguments, confusion, uncertainty. The plans shift day by day, like sand slipping through fingers. And still, the British continue forward, calm and confident, as if the entire coastline is a straight road paved just for them. The emperor watches the map and realizes the storm is not slowing. The storm is heading straight for the heart of China. A quiet ending full of worry as the chapter closes. The palace sleeps uneasily. Guards patrol slowly. Messengers rest after long rides. Officials dream of cannons and maps. The emperor lies awake, thinking of tomorrow, because tomorrow might bring another fallen port, another lost river, another argument, another fear, or maybe a chance to turn the tide. But for now, the empire waits, the court waits, everyone waits, and the war moves on. If you could float above Qing China during this moment in history, like a sleepy bird, or maybe like a kite someone forgot to reel in, you'd see something strange spreading across the land. And no, it's not fog. And no, it's not the smell of someone's breakfast noodles either. It is defeat. A quiet, heavy, slow-moving defeat that clings to every soldier's boots, every general's sigh, and every messenger's exhausted horse. China, the great empire that once seemed unshakable, is now limping through a chapter it never wanted to read. This is the long march of defeat, and trust me, it's not a fun walk. But don't worry, we're telling it softly, like a bedtime story where the ending is still far away and the pillow is still warm. The empire walks, and walks, and walks. Picture long roads stretching across China. Roads that had once carried proud officials, silk traders, and poets trying to write something deep while staring at mountains. Now, those same roads are filled with Qing soldiers marching back from yet another battle they weren't ready for, carrying weapons that look old enough to need retirement benefits. Every step is heavy. Every village they pass offers quiet stares. You can almost hear the soldiers thinking, "Man, why is Britain so strong? And why are we not?" And honestly, good question. Britain had steam-powered ships, modern cannons, and soldiers trained with new military discipline. The Qing army had, well, courage, and a lot of outdated gear. And some commanders who still believe they could scare cannons by yelling loudly. Spoiler, cannons don't care. The news travels like whispered wind. The strange thing about defeat is that it travels faster than victory. You know how gossip moves around your family in 5 minutes? This was kind of like that. Every failed defense, every city lost, every ship sunk. News spread across China like wind passing through bamboo. Soft, but fast. Villagers heard it first from soldiers passing by. Merchants heard it in tea shops. Officials heard it from messengers who looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days. Even the emperor heard it, from advisors who definitely could have used better timing. Imagine waking up from a nap and hearing, "Your Majesty, more bad news." Not ideal. The empire was learning, piece by piece, that this war was unlike anything they had fought before. Tired feet, tired hearts. Now, imagine a Qing soldier. He's walking, and walking, and walking. His armor is heavy. His backpack is heavy. His mood is extremely heavy. Maybe he's thinking about home. Maybe he's thinking about dumplings. Maybe both. But mostly, he's thinking, how do you fight a war where the enemy can hit you from far away, from the sea, with weapons that sound like thunder? See, the British didn't have to fight close. They didn't need hand-to-hand. Their ships could bombard from a distance, and the Qing troops simply couldn't reach them. It was like trying to argue with someone who drives away mid-sentence. You can't win that. The march becomes a symbol. This long march wasn't just soldiers moving. It was a symbol of everything China was facing. Old traditions bumping into new technology, pride meeting painful reality, and empire learning it wasn't invincible. That last part stung the most. For centuries, China saw itself as the center of the world, the Middle Kingdom. But now, the barbarian nations they once looked down on had powerful machines, modern cannons, and ships that didn't care about ancient borders. Imagine being told your whole life that you're the strongest, and then someone shows up with a bigger stick. Ouch. Commanders feel the pressure while soldiers marched on dusty paths. The commanders sat in tents trying to figure out how to stop the unstoppable. Their maps were covered in little wooden markers showing British movement. This city lost this. Port seized. This river blocked. And each meeting ended the same way. Maybe if we try harder? But trying harder doesn't work when the problem isn't effort. It's technology. It's training. It's modernization. China wasn't weak. It was simply outdated. And the commanders knew it, even if they didn't say it aloud. Villagers watched the march. Imagine a small village that a grandmother is sweeping her doorway. Children are chasing chickens. A pot of rice is steaming quietly. Then suddenly, they see the long line of soldiers walking through, dusty, tired, silent. Nobody needs to ask what happened. Defeat has a look you can't hide. Villagers offer water, some food, maybe a few comforting words. But even their kindness feels heavy, because they know this war is slipping away from China's hands. The British ships aren't just far away anymore. Their presence can be felt even in inland villages, because every soldier marching home is a reminder of how impossible this war feels. The emperor feels the cracks back in Beijing. The emperor listens to reports with the calmest face he can manage. But inside, he knows things are falling apart, that he wants to believe the empire can still win. He wants to believe tradition and loyalty can overcome cannons and steamships. But every day, new reports arrive. Every day, defeat steps closer. And every day, the long march continues. Hope. But a small one. Even with defeat crawling across the land like a slow shadow, there is still a tiny flicker of hope. China is big. It still has strong people. It still has pride. Maybe, just maybe, there's a chance to push back. But to do that, China needs something it doesn't have yet. A new way of fighting. A new way of thinking. A new understanding of the world. For now, though, the soldiers keep walking. The defeat keeps spreading, and the empire keeps learning a lesson it really didn't want to learn. A soft ending for a hard chapter. So tonight, as this chapter closes, imagine the sound of boots on dusty roads fading into the distance. Imagine the quiet of a country trying to stay strong while the world around it changes. This is the long march of defeat, not just a physical journey, but the moment when the Qing Empire finally realized the world was moving faster than they were. And that realization hurt. But the story isn't over. Not yet. If the Qing Empire were a person right now, it would probably be sitting on a chair, rubbing its temples, staring at a long list of problems, and thinking, okay, where do I even start? China wasn't just struggling. It was confused, tired, annoyed, and honestly, a little embarrassed. Defeat after defeat had rolled across the land. And now the empire was doing what many of us have done during stressful situations, trying random ideas and hoping at least one of them works. It was a desperate time, and desperate times create interesting plans. Let's step into this chapter softly, like tiptoeing into a room where everyone looks stressed and you're just trying not to make eye contact. Meetings, and more meetings inside the imperial court. You could practically smell the pressure. Officials gathered in long robes, holding scrolls, whispering nervously, giving speeches that sounded confident but felt shaky on the inside. One official would stand up, clear his throat, and say something like, "My emperor, we should modernize the army." Another would stand up, "No, no, no, we should strengthen the coast." A third, "No, we must negotiate with Britain." And in the corner, someone probably muttered, "Can we just pause the war for one day so I can sleep?" You can't blame them. When an empire is being hit from sea, land, and economy all at once, ideas start flying around like birds in a storm. Trying to modernize overnight. Here's the funny thing. For centuries, China didn't need Western-style technology. Life was stable. The empire was huge. The world came to them, not the other way around. But now, suddenly, everything needed to change, fast. And trying to modernize an entire empire overnight is, well, like trying to learn swimming during a flood. The Qing court scrambled to upgrade. They looked at British cannons and said, "We need those." They looked at British ships and said, "We definitely need those." They looked at British soldiers and said, "Do they come with instruction manuals?" Factories tried to produce more weapons and ammo. Workers hammered metal until their hands hurt. Designers tried sketching new ideas. The problem? China wasn't just behind. It was behind by decades. This was like trying to race someone who has a motorcycle, while you have a bicycle with one flat tire. Generals try new tactics while officials argued in Beijing. Generals on the battlefield did something impressive. They tried to adapt. They held emergency drills. They practiced new formations. They attempted creative things like, what if we use night attacks? What if we set traps along the coast? What if we pretend we're stronger than we are? Look, I respect the effort, but cleverness can't beat cannons that fire faster and farther than anything you've ever seen. The British could attack from the sea with ships that didn't fear the wind, didn't need oars, and didn't wait for tides. Steamships were the real troublemakers, basically floating tanks with attitude. Qing commanders were brave, but bravery doesn't make bullets softer. The empire's spirit starts to crack. Remember that long march of defeat from the last chapter? Well, now the emotional march begins. Ordinary people felt it. Farmers felt it. Shopkeepers felt it. Students felt it. Even children heard grown-ups whispering things like, "Will we be okay? Will this war end soon? Why is Britain so strong?" Fear spread quietly, like morning fog rolling across fields. The empire had faced invasions before. Mongols, tribes from the north, rebels from within. But this was different. This enemy didn't stay on land. They came by sea with technology no one had seen. They fought at a distance. Their ships were like beasts, and China felt small, not because it was weak, but because it was outdated. It's hard to fight when the world has changed, but you haven't. The emperor's heavy heart inside the Forbidden City. The emperor tried to hold himself together. Every day he received reports. Every day the news got worse that he couldn't show fear. Emperors weren't supposed to. But deep down, he knew the truth. The empire wasn't prepared for this kind of war. He wanted to protect his people. He wanted to defend the land. He wanted to believe victory was still possible. But how do you win when the enemy is basically from the future? Still, he refused to give up. Orders were sent out. Strategies were rewritten. More troops were called in. Even in defeat, China fought with pride. Desperation turns into determination. Something interesting happened during this desperate moment. China began to learn. Slowly, painfully, but it learned. Generals started copying Western drills. Shipbuilders studied British steamships like confused students trying to understand a complicated math problem. Ordinary people supported the war in small ways, donating supplies, helping soldiers, praying at temples. It wasn't enough to win. Not yet, but it showed something important. China might be struggling, but it wasn't broken. Not completely. A nation holding its breath as Chapter 17 closes. Imagine China as a giant figure standing on a cliff, staring at a stormy sea. Waves crash, clouds swirl, lightning flashes, and that figure whispers to itself, "We're not done yet." Even with defeat spreading and plans failing left and right, there is still a tiny spark of hope, a spark that refuses to go out. A spark that says, "Maybe we can survive this." And sometimes, a spark is all you need to keep going. If you ever take a quiet walk along the Chinese coast today, waves brushing your feet, salty wind touching your face, you might not realize that long ago, these same shores were the setting for one of the most stressful moments in Qing history. Back then, the coastline wasn't peaceful. It wasn't calm. And nobody was walking around thinking about seashells. Instead, the coast was filled with forts, big stone structures with cannons pointed at the sea, guards pacing along walls, and commanders trying very hard to look confident even when they weren't. These forts were meant to protect China from danger, but danger didn't listen, because now, the British were arriving, and they weren't stopping. The first fort sees smoke. Imagine an early morning, seagulls crying, waves moving softly, and a group of Qing soldiers rubbing their eyes, still waking up. Then suddenly, boom. No, not thunder, not fireworks, not someone dropping a giant wok. British cannons. The first coastal fort felt the shock. The walls trembled. Dust fell from old stones. Soldiers grabbed their gear so fast you'd think someone yelled, "Free breakfast." But this wasn't breakfast. This was the beginning of a slow, painful collapse. The British ships, with their tall masts and steam-powered engines, opened fire from a distance the Chinese cannons couldn't reach. Imagine trying to hit someone with a small stick while they throw rocks at you from across a river. Not fair, not fun, and definitely not winnable. Chinese bravery meets British power. Here's the thing people sometimes forget. The Qing soldiers were brave, very brave. They loaded their cannons. They fired back. They didn't run. They didn't panic. They stood on the walls even when the air filled with smoke and broken stone. But bravery isn't bulletproof, and courage doesn't stop shells launched from advanced British guns. Every time the Qing fired, their shots fell short. Every time the British fired, another piece of the fort cracked. You can almost hear one soldier thinking, "Why does their cannon sound like a thunder god, and ours sounds like someone sneezing?" Forts fall one by one. When the first fort fell, commanders hoped it was just bad luck. Maybe the wind was wrong. Maybe a cannon misfired. Maybe they just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. But then the second fort fell, and the third, and the fourth. Each fort stood a little weaker, a little older, a little less prepared to face modern warfare. The coastline became a silent witness to defeat. Fort by fort, stone by stone, British ships moved along the coast like they were on a sightseeing cruise, except every time they visited a fort, it exploded, awkward. The sound of collapse. Imagine the sound. Stone cracking, cannonballs smashing into walls, commanders shouting orders through smoke, flags falling from towers. It wasn't just walls breaking. It was confidence breaking. Each fort represented security. A promise, a shield. And now that shield had holes everywhere. Even the sea breeze felt different, like it carried a warning. Soldiers faced the hard truth. The Qing soldiers were exhausted. Their boots were worn. Their uniforms smelled like smoke and sweat. And their hearts were heavy. They weren't losing because they lacked courage. They were losing because their weapons belonged to another century. Some soldiers whispered, "How do we fight ships made of iron?" Others asked, "How does their cannon fire so far?" Some didn't ask anything at all. They just stared at the burning forts, trying to understand how everything fell apart so fast. War is loud, but defeat is very quiet. Commanders try to hold the line across the coastline. Commanders met in rooms filled with maps and candlelight. Lines were drawn. Plans were made. Reinforcements were requested. But every hour, another messenger came with bad news. The fort has fallen. The wall is gone. The British ships have advanced. Some commanders tried to inspire their troops. Others tried new defensive tricks, that a few even tried setting traps on the beach. But the British didn't need to land on the beach. Their ships stayed safely offshore, firing from a distance like it was target practice. How do you stop an enemy who doesn't even need to come close? Villagers watched from afar along the coast. Villagers stood on hilltops, shading their eyes with their hands, watching the smoke rise from forts they had seen all their lives. If you could sit quietly in the corner of that little negotiation tent by the Chinese coast, just sitting there like a polite ghost who minds his own business, you would feel something heavy in the air. Not smoke, not humidity, but history. History has a smell. You know, sometimes it smells like ink drying on a scroll. Sometimes it smells like tired soldiers resting under the sun. And sometimes it smells like fear mixed with decisions nobody wants to make. This moment, it smelled like an empire holding its breath, because the Treaty of Nanjing wasn't finished yet, but everyone could feel it coming. The tent grows heavier each day. Every morning, the British officers walked into the negotiation tent with the confidence of people who slept very well, probably in comfortable beds, probably after eating very comfortable breakfasts. Meanwhile, the Qing officials walked in looking like they had aged 10 years overnight. Their robes were neat, their faces were calm, their voices were polite, but their eyes were tired. Tired from loss, tired from pressure, tired from carrying the weight of a 1,000-year-old empire on their shoulders. You can imagine one of them thinking, "Man, I wish I could just go home and drink tea right now." But no tea today. Today was about deciding the future. British terms hit hard. The British offered terms that were, let's say, not gentle. They wanted ports. They wanted money. They wanted influence. They wanted control over trade. One official read the list out loud, and you could practically hear the air gasp. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement that said, "We won, and we want everyone to know." The Qing officials tried to push back, just a little. "Could we discuss this part? No, this amount is too high. No, how about still no?" The British weren't being mean. They were being victorious. Victory gives people very firm opinions. China's painful realization as the days passed. A truth settled into the Qing officials' hearts like a cold stone. They had no bargaining power. None. They couldn't say no. They couldn't threaten battle. They couldn't delay forever. Because every mile the British ships moved inland, China lost another inch of confidence. Now the officials were stuck in the hardest place anyone can be. Forced agreement. They weren't signing because they wanted to. They were signing because the alternative was worse. Much worse. News travels north while the negotiations continued. News traveled across China like wind through bamboo. Whispers in markets. Talks in tea houses. Rumors in village squares. The British want ports. They want money. They want Hong Kong. They want more trade. People didn't know the exact terms yet, but everyone felt the heavy shift. Some felt fear. Some felt anger. Some felt confusion. But one thing was clear. China was at a turning point, and nothing would go back to the old way. A walk outside the tent one evening. Right before sunset, one Qing official stepped outside the negotiation tent to breathe. He walked to the shore. He watched the waves move slowly, softly, like they didn't even know a war was happening. But he saw the British ships floating in the distance, big, modern, made of strong wood and iron. They looked like floating mountains, calm and confident. Then he looked back at the land behind him. Ancient, proud, tired. For the first time in his life, he felt small. Not because he was weak, but because the world had changed without asking for permission. This moment hurt him more than any battle. Inside the tent, ink waits back inside. The British officers prepared documents, sheets of parchment, fancy ink, official seals. Every item placed neatly on the table, waiting for signatures, waiting for history. The Qing officials stared at the papers the way someone stares at medical bills, hoping the numbers magically disappear, but they didn't. They were very much still there. The last attempts at negotiation. Even in the final days, the Qing officials tried. They tried adjusting numbers. They tried softening conditions. They tried appealing to fairness. But the British held firm. Not angry, not loud. Just firm. One British officer said something like, "Let's be practical." And practical, usually means we're not changing anything. It wasn't cruelty. It was confidence shaped by victory. The atmosphere of surrender. There is a quiet kind of surrender, the kind where nobody cries, nobody shouts, nobody collapses dramatically. It's just silence, soft, heavy silence. That's the silence that filled the tent now. Officials nodded slowly. Brushes were held carefully. Inkstones were prepared. Everyone knew what was coming. The treaty wasn't signed yet, but its shadow was already lying across the table. A country holds its breath in Beijing, in villages, in ports, across dusty roads, across mountains and rivers. The empire waited. People didn't know the details, but they sensed the shift. Something old was disappearing. Something new was arriving. And nobody knew if it was good or bad. Change is scary like that, especially when it comes from foreign ships with giant cannons. The calm before the pen touches paper as this chapter closes. Picture this final scene. The tent is quiet. The candles flicker gently. The papers are ready. The seals are polished. The brushes are dipped in ink. British officers sit straight-backed, hands folded. Qing officials sit with their shoulders slightly heavy. Outside, the sea whispers softly against the shore, like it's trying to say, something big is about to happen. China hasn't signed the Treaty of Nanjing yet, but it's close, very close, and the empire stands on the edge of a moment that will rewrite everything. Imagine you're standing on a quiet riverbank in southern China in the year 1842. The sun is setting, the water is calm, birds are doing bird things, and everything looks peaceful. But trust me, China is not peaceful inside. After months of being hammered by British ships, cannons, and ridiculous amounts of firepower, the Qing Empire is exhausted. The officials are tired. The soldiers are tired. Honestly, even the forts look tired. Everyone wants one thing: this war to end. And so we arrive at one of the biggest turning points in China's history. A moment that came with a fancy name, a wooden table, probably some tea no one enjoyed, and a document that would change everything. The Treaty of Nanjing. Let's walk into the scene slowly, like we're tiptoeing into a sad but very important moment. A treaty signed not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Picture the Qing negotiators sitting across from the British. The British are calm, almost too calm, because they know the power balance. They have steamships, cannons, rifles, and confidence. China has bravery and culture, sure, but none of that stops cannonballs. The Qing officials know they're dealing with a storm. They simply cannot push back. The mood in the room, heavy, awkward, like when you agree to buy something online and then see the shipping cost, but it's too late to cancel. The war had drained China so badly that agreeing to British terms felt less like negotiation and more like surrendering with a polite face. What the treaty demanded, the big, ouch, list. The Treaty of Nanjing had many conditions, and every single one felt like a punch to the empire. Let's break them down gently, so it doesn't hurt too much. 1. China had to open 5 ports: Canton, Amoy, Ningpo, Fuzhou, and Shanghai. These places weren't just ports anymore. They were now international business playgrounds. British merchants could live there, trade there, walk around confidently, probably even complain about the weather there. Point 2. Britain got Hong Kong, yes. The whole island. A tiny island, sure, but tiny things can be powerful. Just look at mosquitoes. Hong Kong would later grow into one of the most important cities on Earth. At this moment, it was simply a place China lost and Britain gained, like a prize from a battle China never wanted. Point 3. China had to pay a huge sum of money. Think of it like losing a fight and then having to pay the winner for the broken furniture, the ruined carpet, the damages to their boots, and also some extra, because why not? It was painful. Very painful. Point 4. Equal trading rights. This meant China could no longer control its own trade rules. Imagine someone entering your house and telling you how much rent you have to pay. Yeah, it was that weird. Why this treaty felt so humiliating. Let's be honest. China had been the strongest civilization in East Asia for centuries. Empires came and went, but China remained. It had culture, knowledge, art, science, and a history that could fill 1,000 libraries. And then suddenly, a foreign power forced them to sign a treaty that took away their power and pride. This wasn't just a political loss. It was emotional. It was moral. It was like being told, you're not in control anymore. And everyone knew it. Even the common people, who didn't know the exact details, felt something shift. Whispers spread. Stories traveled. The empire looked strong from the outside, but inside, cracks were forming, quiet, dangerous cracks. The strange calm after the storm. One might think a war ending brings peace. But this peace felt odd. China's officials walked around feeling like they'd been defeated twice. Once on the battlefield, and then again at the negotiation table. The emperor was furious, disappointed, shocked, everything at once. But what could he do? The damage was done. British soldiers sailed away slowly, like, thanks for the ports and the island. See you later. Qing guards watched them leave with a mix of anger and helplessness. And in the cities, life continued, kind of. People went back to work. Boats returned to rivers. Markets reopened. Tea shops buzzed again. But under all that normal life, the empire felt different. People sensed that they were stepping into a new world, one where foreign powers now had a say in Chinese affairs. How common people felt, confused, curious, and a bit scared. Imagine you're a fisherman in Canton. Yesterday, your biggest problem was whether the fish were biting. Today, British merchants are walking around speaking English, carrying goods you've never seen, and asking for prices using weird silver coins. Or imagine you're a local shopkeeper. Suddenly, foreigners want silk and tea in large amounts. They have new uniforms, new habits, even new umbrellas. China wasn't just opening 5 ports. It was opening 5 doors, and behind those doors were ideas, technology, and influences the local people had never faced before. Some were curious, some were nervous, some just wanted to sell their noodles and mind their business. But everyone felt the shift. Britain celebrates. China reflects. Back in Britain, people celebrated the victory. Newspapers printed bold headlines. Merchants got excited about the new trade opportunities. Politicians boasted about how their empire had expanded. But in China, it was the opposite. The imperial court was quiet. Officials were careful with their words. Every decision felt heavier now, because deep down, they knew this wasn't the end. This treaty wasn't closing a chapter. It was opening a new one. A chapter full of more foreign demands, more pressure, and more conflict. China's old worldview, "We are the center of the world," was shaking. And when a worldview shakes, everything else starts shaking too. A soft ending. The calm before a bigger storm. As the chapter ends, imagine China looking out at its coastline, watching foreign ships come and go, watching new customs appear, watching the world enter, uninvited but unstoppable. The empire was still standing, still ancient, still proud, but the pride had cracks. The walls had weaknesses, the horizon held more storms, and the Treaty of Nanjing, it was only the first warning. Picture China right after the Treaty of Nanjing. The ink on the paper is barely dry. The British ships have slowly turned around, their sails catching the wind, their cannons silent for now. And China? China is standing there like someone who just woke up from a bad dream and needs a minute to understand what just happened. This was the beginning of something new. Not exciting new, not fun new, but the kind of new where you look around and say, okay, nothing will be the same again. Let's step into this moment gently. Life after the treaty. The gates slowly open with the treaty signed. Those 5 ports, Canton, Amoy, Ningpo, Fuzhou, and Shanghai, became treaty ports. Sounds fancy, right? But really, it meant that China had lost control over big parts of its trade. These ports were like doors the British had opened and politely said, "We'll be using these now, thanks." Chinese merchants watched foreign ships arrive with wide eyes. Local dock workers stared at British sailors walking around with confidence, wearing uniforms, carrying crates of goods, speaking languages they didn't understand. It was a strange mix of curiosity, fear, and confusion. Imagine you're a shopkeeper in Shanghai. One day, everything is familiar, the same tastes, the same customers, the same gossip. The next day, foreigners walk in looking for tea, silk, porcelain, and anything else they can carry back home. They try to bargain using hand gestures and a smile because they don't know a single word of Chinese. It's like 2 worlds suddenly smashed together and had to figure out how to share the same street. Foreign goods began to flow in. China had always been the one sending things out. Porcelain, tea, silk. Now, things were coming in. Strange-looking fabrics, new tools, different clothing styles, metal goods with unfamiliar shapes, even canned food, which made some Chinese traders stare at it like, "Why is your soup trapped inside a metal cylinder?" Foreign missionaries arrived too. Some peacefully walked around trying to talk about religion. Others just wanted to help the poor and build schools. Many locals didn't know what to do with them, and foreign newspapers, maps, machines, and ideas quietly began slipping into China. Each one small, but together, they were like drops of water on a stone, slowly changing the shape of everything. The Qing court tries to pretend it's fine inside the forbidden city. The emperor and his advisors met in long, stressful meetings. They tried to explain what was happening without making the emperor angry. Not an easy job, officials reported. Foreigners are settling in the ports, Your Majesty. British merchants have built warehouses, Your Majesty. They are walking freely, buying things, and, talking to everyone. The emperor listened, nodded, frowned, sighed, and sometimes went silent. He knew China had entered a new era, but he was determined not to lose face to the outside world. He tried to look calm. But inside, he probably wanted to flip a table. The Qing dynasty had always believed China was superior to foreign nations, the center of the world, the Middle Kingdom. And now foreign powers could freely roam Chinese cities. It felt like pride shrinking a little each day. Common people see change up close for regular folks. The changes were not political, they were personal. Farmers near coastal areas saw more foreign ships than ever before. Children pointed at the strange boats with iron hulls and steam engines, whispering, "Are those dragons?" Because honestly, they kind of looked like it. Fishermen got pushed aside as British trading vessels took priority at docks. Street vendors found themselves learning new numbers, new hand signals, and new habits just to sell snacks to the foreigners. Some people were scared, some were annoyed, some just shrugged and said, as long as they pay on time. Slowly, China's sense of normal began to shift. Foreign settlements. A new world inside China soon. In places like Shanghai, foreigners built neighborhoods that looked nothing like traditional Chinese towns. Brick houses, gas lamps, streets with signs in English, clubs, churches, merchant offices. It was like a small piece of Europe had been planted in China. Locals walked by these areas with curiosity, sometimes fear, sometimes amusement. I hear they eat bread every day. One person might whisper. I hear they drink cold milk. Another might say, horrified. I hear they don't take naps. Someone else might add, shocked beyond belief that IT was funny but real. Two cultures meeting for the first time and trying to figure each other out. The uncomfortable truth. China was no longer in control now. Matter how much China tried to act like everything was still normal, everyone knew it wasn't. Foreigners had rights inside China that Chinese people didn't have in foreign countries. They could trade freely, live in special districts, even follow their own laws instead of Chinese laws. IT was like someone entered your house, set up a chair, and said, "Don't worry, I'll bring my own rules." You'd smile politely, but inside, you'd be screaming. Chinese officials felt humiliated. They didn't say it out loud, but the loss of control over parts of their own land hurt deeply. This feeling would grow, and later turn into something powerful and dangerous. The people start asking questions for the first time in a long time. Ordinary citizens started whispering things like, "Why couldn't we stop them? Why are they stronger? What do they have that we don't?" These questions weren't meant to challenge the emperor, but they showed something new. People were thinking beyond tradition, beyond pride, beyond old beliefs. Some scholars argued that China needed reforms. New machines, new weapons, new knowledge. They weren't saying China wasn't great. They just said the world had changed, and China needed to change too. Others refused to accept that. No, they said, China is fine. Foreigners are the problem. And just like that, the empire became divided between those who wanted to learn from the world and those who wanted the world to stay far, far away. A soft ending. A quiet turning point. The years after the treaty felt like standing at a crossroads. China wasn't falling apart yet, but the ground under its feet was shifting. Foreign influence was slowly spreading. Ideas were moving silently. Trade was reshaping cities. China was still ancient, proud, and vast, but now part of a world that refused to stay outside its borders. This chapter doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a question hanging in the air. Would China adapt or resist? And whichever choice it made would shape its future forever. Picture China a few years after the Treaty of Nanjing. Life on the surface looks normal. Markets are open. Farmers are in the fields. Fishermen are out catching fish. and street vendors are arguing about who owes who 5 copper coins. But underneath all that, there's a quiet storm forming. Not a storm like thunder and lightning, but a slow, heavy, emotional storm. The kind that builds pressure day after day until the air feels thick. China was living with a new reality, and the more time passed, the more people realized something uncomfortable. Foreigners had more power on Chinese soil than the Chinese themselves. Let's step into this moment as gently as possible, because the empire is starting to feel things. And those feelings are not cute. The people are starting to get annoyed. Really annoyed. Imagine you're a regular person in Canton. You grew up with Chinese officials telling you the empire is the strongest in the world. You were taught that foreigners were strange, far away people who didn't matter much. But now, those same foreigners are walking around your streets with confidence. They pay less taxes than you. They have their own courts. They don't follow Chinese laws. And the worst part, sometimes they act like they own the place. People would whisper things like, "Wait, so they can break a rule and we can't even punish them? How does that make sense?" Or, "What kind of guest comes into your house and tells you how to arrange the furniture?" And honestly, they had a point. The more foreigners settled in the treaty ports, the more locals felt pushed aside in their own homeland. The scholar class feels the burn. The Chinese scholar officials, the proud, educated elite, were especially upset. They studied Confucian classics for years. They passed difficult exams. They trained to protect the empire and guide the people. And now, everything they believed in was being challenged by foreign traders with fancy ships and loud cannons. For centuries, Chinese scholars had believed China was the Middle Kingdom, the center of the world, the most advanced civilization. But the Opium Wars showed something painful. China was not as strong as it thought. Scholars reacted in 2 ways. Group A: we must learn the foreign technology and improve ourselves. Group B: no. Foreigners are rude, greedy, and weird. They are the problem. Group B was louder. Much louder. Some scholars even wrote angry essays and poems, blaming foreigners for corrupting Chinese morals. They said British goods were cheap and soulless. They complained that foreign ideas were like poison, worse than opium itself. Was their writing dramatic? Yes. Was it a little funny sometimes? Also yes. But behind the drama was real fear. Fear that China was losing its way. Farmers and villagers hear rumors, and rumors grow in rural areas. People didn't always understand the details of the treaty, but they understood one thing. Foreigners were taking advantage of China. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said foreigners wanted to steal Chinese land. Others said they wanted to take Chinese children. Others claimed foreign medicine was witchcraft. And one rumor said foreigners took pictures to capture people's souls, which is both creepy and kind of funny. Most of these rumors weren't true, but fear doesn't care about facts. It cares about feelings. And feelings were spreading everywhere. Traders and merchants feel squeezed. Local traders had mixed emotions. On one hand, foreign merchants brought new business and new money. On the other hand, those same foreign merchants were so powerful that Chinese traders often felt like they were being pushed into little corners of the marketplace. Imagine owning a shop for 20 years, then one day a foreign company shows up with big warehouses, shiny goods, lower prices, and zero respect for your struggles. That you'd feel, well, annoyed, maybe even insulted. Local merchants complained that foreigners got special treatment from officials. They complained that foreign traders were protected by their own governments. They complained that Chinese businesses didn't have a chance. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Officials try to calm everyone down, but fail. Meanwhile, Chinese officials were stuck between 2 giant pressures. Pressure 1. The emperor and the Qing court wanted things calm. They hated foreign interference, but didn't want another war they would lose. Pressure 2. The local people were angry, confused, and demanding action. Officials tried everything. They gave speeches about maintaining harmony. They told villagers to stay calm. They promised they were working on it. It was like trying to stop a boiling pot with a paper lid. The anger didn't go away. It simmered. It grew. It bubbled up in silence. And the officials knew something important. If this tension exploded, it would be horrible. Foreigners noticed the hostility. Foreign merchants and missionaries weren't blind. They could feel the tension in the air. Locals stared at them longer. Market prices got higher. Bargains became harder. People whispered when they walked past. Some foreigners tried to be friendly. Others didn't care. A few behaved arrogantly, which only made things worse. Chinese workers in the ports often said things like, "These people don't understand us." And foreigners often said, "These people don't like us." And both were correct. The perfect recipe for trouble. Let's list the ingredients now sitting inside China. Angry scholars, frustrated merchants, fearful villagers, humiliated officials, foreigners who didn't know the cultural rules, foreigners who didn't care about the cultural rules. Mix all of this together. Let it sit for a few years, and what do you get? A national mood that is not healthy, not stable, not peaceful. The resentment wasn't loud yet. It wasn't open rebellion. But the air felt heavier, especially in cities near foreign settlements. Everyone knew something was building. Everyone felt the tension growing. But no one knew what form it would take. Soft ending. The quiet before the fire. By the late 1840s, China was like a kettle on a stove. The water wasn't boiling yet, but you could hear the tiny pops. You could see the small bubbles forming at the bottom. You could feel the heat rising. The empire was trying its best to look steady, but inside, emotions were shaking like thin glass. And resentment, it doesn't disappear at it waits. Soon, these feelings would explode into movements, rebellions, and conflicts that would shake China from north to south. But for now, we end this chapter in the quiet moment before things go wrong. That let's drift quietly into China in the late 1840s. The sky looks peaceful, the fields look peaceful, the markets look peaceful, but just like a calm-looking pot of tea that's secretly boiling at the bottom, China was hiding something big. All the anger, confusion, humiliation, and stress from the last decade was mixing together into something dangerous. And somewhere far from the emperor's palace, deep in the countryside, an idea was spreading. A wild idea. An idea that would eventually turn into one of the biggest rebellions in human history. But right now, it's still a tiny spark. That let's step into that moment, slowly and gently. A shaken empire. Searching for relief, the Opium War had done more than break China's pride. It had created cracks in everything. People didn't trust the government like before. Officials didn't trust each other. Scholars were arguing. Farmers were struggling. Bandits were roaming. And taxes? Always higher than people wanted. When life becomes heavy, people look for hope. Hope in the sky. Hope in religion. Hope in leaders who promise change. China was becoming the perfect place for a movement to grow. Something strong enough to attract the poor, the lost, the angry, and the tired. And that movement came from a man who believed he had been chosen for something big, very big. Enter Hong Xiuquan. An unlikely spark. Our story brings us to a village schoolteacher named Hong Xiuquan. Not a powerful official, not a rich merchant, just a man who had failed the civil service exam so many times that even he probably lost count. But Hong had something else inside him. A burning belief that he was meant to do something important. One day, after failing the exam again, he became sick. Very sick. And during that sickness, he had visions, strange, dramatic visions. In them, he believed he saw heavenly figures telling him he had a mission. When he recovered, he held on to those visions like treasure. He believed he had a divine purpose. He believed China needed cleansing. He believed he was chosen to lead the people into a better future. And honestly, at that time, many people were ready to follow someone. Anyone. If it meant things might improve. People are tired. And ready for change. Imagine you're a farmer in a remote village. Your crops fail every few years. Bandits steal from you. Taxes rise. Officials demand bribes. And on top of all that, foreigners walk around your ports acting like they own the country. Your world feels unfair. Heavy. Exhausting. Then a group arrives in your village saying, "Join us. A new age is coming. A better one. One without corruption, without foreign control, without suffering." You'd listen. You'd be curious. You might even feel hope for the first time in a long time. That's what the Taiping movement began offering. A promise, a dream, a fresh start, a message spreads like wildfire. Hong Xiuquan's teachings began spreading from village to village. At first quietly, then quickly, then powerfully, people whispered about him. A teacher with visions. A man chosen by heaven. A leader who will fix the empire's problems. His followers grew. His message grew. And the movement grew. The Qing government didn't notice right away. They were busy arguing about foreign influence, fixing broken walls, trying to control the ports, and managing endless paperwork. But by the time officials noticed, the movement wasn't small anymore. It was something else, something they could no longer ignore. The Qing government gets nervous. Reports started arriving in the capital. People are gathering in the south. They are forming groups. They are refusing local authority. At first, the officials brushed it off. Rebellions happened. That was normal. But this one had something unusual. Purpose. The Taiping followers weren't just angry villagers swinging sticks. They had organization, discipline, a mission they believed in deeply. They sang songs. They trained. They marched in formation. They preached about equality. They talked about a heavenly kingdom. Officials read the reports with growing alarm that a small spark had turned into a glowing ember. Foreigners watched from their settlements. Meanwhile, foreigners in the treaty ports noticed something was shifting too. Missionaries reported that their teachings were being mixed into strange new beliefs. British merchants noticed that trade caravans were being disrupted. Rumors of armed groups moving around the countryside reached their ears. Foreigners weren't scared yet, just concerned that China's instability could affect business. And if there's anything merchants hate more than war, it's bad business. Foreign eyes watched the South carefully. They didn't know it yet, but this rebellion would eventually shake their world too. The empire feels the ground tremble as the Taiping movement grew larger. The Qing dynasty felt the pressure rising. Scholars argued in court meetings. Military leaders warned the emperor. Governors sent panicked letters. This is not normal. This is not small. This could spread. But the Qing government was already weakened, militarily, financially, and emotionally, after losing the Opium War. They weren't ready for another conflict, yet the conflict was coming. Marching slowly, building quietly, growing steadily. A nation full of pressure points everywhere you looked. Life felt tense. Villagers were angry at officials. Officials were angry at foreign influence. Foreigners were confused by local hostility. Merchants struggled. Scholars disagreed. And the emperor, well, he probably had a headache every morning. China felt like a rope being pulled from too many sides. Eventually, something had to snap. The Taiping movement wasn't the explosion yet, but it was the fuse, and that fuse had now been lit. Soft ending. A spark slowly turns into flames. We end this chapter not with battle, not with war, but with something much quieter and more dangerous. Momentum. People were searching for hope, and the Taiping movement offered it. People were tired of suffering. And the Taiping movement promised change. The empire didn't know it yet, but the spark that started in one man's visions was about to grow into a fire that would burn across half of China. But not yet. For now, the spark is still small, still quiet, but shining brighter every day. That if you're still awake, wow, respect. And if you're sleepy, that's perfect too, because this chapter is meant to feel like slow waves hitting a quiet shore. Except those waves are British gunboats, and that shore, well, that's China. Oh, let's drift into chapter 25. China, at this point in the story, was like a huge old dragon that had been sleeping for centuries. A proud dragon, yes. A legendary dragon, yes. But also a dragon that didn't check its notifications. And trust me, there were a lot of unread notifications. Britain wasn't sending friendly messages. Britain was sending warships. But right now, in this chapter, the shock is finally sinking in. This is the moment when China starts to realize, oh no, this is bigger than a trade problem. This is something else entirely. A strange calm before the storm. The year was 1840-something, and all across the coast, the air felt different. Like the world was holding its breath. Chinese soldiers stood on watchtowers built generations ago, towers meant for old enemies, not strange Western ships powered by smoke and iron. The soldiers squinted at the sea, confused and a little scared, because out there, on the blue water, were shapes they had never seen. British ships didn't look normal. They were tall, dark, and filled with cannons. They didn't sail like Chinese ships. They moved like floating fortresses, slow but unstoppable, like saying, yes, we traveled half the planet, and no, we're not tired. Meanwhile, local towns still tried to go on with daily life. Fishermen cast nets. Shopkeepers opened stores. Kids chased chickens. Everyone was pretending things were normal, even though rumors were spreading like wildfire. They say the British ships spit fire. They say they shoot from miles away. They say their guns don't miss. And someone always added, they say even Lin Zexu is worried. When the hero is worried, you know it's serious. The court in panic mode, quiet panic, of course. Inside the Forbidden City, officials gathered. But instead of calm debates, the room felt like a pressure cooker. Every man there, dressed in silk robes, with long beards that showed wisdom or at least good hair care, argued all at once. Some shouted, "Negotiate. We must talk before things get worse." Others argued, "No, it's just a small Western nation acting rude. China has faced worse." Which, of course, was not true. Then someone whispered, just loud enough, "They defeated India with ease." Silence. Nothing freezes a room like a reminder that the British Empire wasn't just a visitor. It was the powerhouse of the century. China's biggest problem: old tools. New war. China still saw war the old way. Line up men, march, fire muskets, reload, and hope for the best at Britain style. Let's send iron ships with cannons that can erase a fort before breakfast. It wasn't a fair fight, like trying to stop a train by throwing pillows at it. Chinese cannons were old, heavy, and fired slowly. British cannons were fast, accurate, and had a much longer range. Chinese walls were strong, but not strong enough for shells that exploded on impact. Worst of all, China couldn't match the speed. The empire was huge, the army was scattered, and communication moved at the speed of horses. Very slow horses. By the time news traveled, Britain had already moved on to the next city. British ships move in. This is the moment when China looked at the sea and saw the truth. The British weren't visiting. They weren't warning. They weren't bluffing. They were here to show power. A fleet of warships approached the coast, sunlight hitting their sails like gold. Soldiers lined the decks, uniforms spotless, muskets gleaming, ready for orders. The British knew exactly what they were doing. They had planned every step. China had, well, hope. And hope is beautiful, but not a strategy. Local forces try and struggle in many towns. Local Chinese commanders tried to prepare. They trained men, fixed broken cannons, and sent messages asking for reinforcements that might arrive a month later, if the messenger didn't stop for dumplings on the way. But the truth was simple. No amount of training could match British firepower. When the British ships got close, even brave soldiers felt small. The ships towered like giants. The cannons looked like monsters. And the sound, oh, the sound. When the first warning shot fired, it echoed across the coastline like thunder splitting the sky. Even animals panicked. Chickens ran in random circles. Dogs barked at invisible enemies. People covered their ears. This wasn't a regular war. This was something China had never seen. The reality hits Beijing when the first news arrived in Beijing. Real news, not rumors. Officials finally understood. Letters described forts collapsing in minutes. Naval officers reported losing entire defenses before they even got close to the enemy. The emperor, Daoguang, felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. He wasn't a weak man. He was a man trapped in a world changing too fast. He asked, "Can we win?" Nobody answered, because everyone knew. The answer wasn't simple. A nation forced to wake up. This chapter marks the turning point. China had been avoiding the storm for years, but now the storm was at the door. This wasn't about opium anymore. It was about pride, sovereignty, survival. China wasn't fighting for trade rights. China was fighting to keep control of its own coastline. The old dragon had to wake up. And waking up from a long sleep is never easy. The calm ends. The chapter closes with the image of China standing at its shoreline. Soldiers, commanders, farmers, fishermen, all watching the horizon. The sea looked peaceful. The sky looked calm. But everyone knew what was coming next. The first full storm of the Opium War. And China was not ready.